Friends, if you want to watch a super hit, emotional and thought-provoking movie The Whale, 2022, in English, then you must like this video because today we are going to explore this film in great detail. And if you are visiting our channel for the very first time, don't forget to subscribe because we keep bringing you exciting videos about movies, their stories, and all the behind-the-scenes secrets. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is The Whale, a film that has touched the hearts of audiences all over the world and has made a powerful impact with its story and performances. In this video, we will uncover what this movie is, why it has created so much buzz, and what makes it such a unique and emotional experience. I will also tell you where you can watch The Whale, whether it's available on any OTT platform, streaming service, or satellite channel, so you don't miss your chance to experience this masterpiece. Along with that, we will go deep into the technical departments of the film, including the beautiful cinematography, the sound design, the music that perfectly matches the mood of the story, the pre-production work, the detailed filming process, and how the movie was polished during post-production. I will also tell you about the budget of the film and how much this movie earned at the box office. We will talk in detail about the story of this film, and I will also give you a short but meaningful review of what the story has to offer, what emotions it brings forward, and how the story connects with the audience. Apart from the storyline, we will also discuss some fascinating facts about the making of this film, the inspirations behind the story, and how the filmmakers created such a moving cinematic experience. I will also introduce you to the star cast of the film. We will talk about which actors played which characters, how they performed, and how perfectly they brought their characters to life. We will explore their performances and the emotional depth they added to the movie. Friends, there are so many interesting things to talk about in today's video, so I would request you to stay with me till the end, because I will share every detail that you will love to know about The Whale. From where to watch it, to the behind-the-scenes stories, to the technical excellence, to the heart-touching performances, this video will cover it all. So without wasting any more time, let's begin this exciting journey into the world of The Whale, 2022. The Whale, 2022, invites us into a story that is intimate, raw, and emotionally heavy right from the very first scene. The film does not open with wide landscapes or a bustling city. Instead, it places us directly into the confined, almost claustrophobic space of Charlie's apartment, which quickly becomes a symbol of his entire world. The story chooses not to rely on multiple flashy locations or dramatic shifts in setting. Instead, it traps us in the same physical and emotional space where Charlie has isolated himself, and this creative choice makes the experience feel intensely personal. The narrative moves in a straightforward linear fashion, but within this timeline, it builds layer upon layer of memory, guilt, love, anger, and desperate hope. There are no time jumps, no alternate perspectives, no experimental cuts. The film is focused, patient, and allows the audience to live each uncomfortable, heartbreaking, and sometimes quietly beautiful moment with Charlie in real time. The story begins with Charlie, a man battling severe obesity, both physically stuck and emotionally trapped. From the moment we meet him, we can sense that time is not on his side. His health is deteriorating, but there is no loud ticking clock or dramatic medical countdown. The urgency is quiet, but it is always there, building in the background of every conversation, every breath, and every small movement he struggles to make. His condition is not just a health issue. It's a reflection of years of pain, self-blame, and emotional isolation. The film uses this physical state as a mirror for Charlie's inner world, showing us that his weight is not the story itself, but a result of much deeper emotional wounds. As the narrative unfolds, we begin to meet the key people who orbit around Charlie's life. His estranged daughter, Ellie, enters the story not as a sweet, loving child longing for connection, but as a sharp, angry teenager filled with resentment. She bursts into Charlie's apartment like a storm, throwing accusations and cruel words, and yet, there is something vulnerable beneath her harsh exterior. The story brilliantly plays with this father-daughter dynamic, giving us moments where we think they are on the verge of mending their broken bond, only to have it shattered again by anger, misunderstandings, or old wounds that refuse to heal. Every scene between Charlie and Ellie carries the weight of years of absence, betrayal, and unfinished conversations, and the push and pull between them keeps the emotional tension alive throughout the film. Then there is Liz, Charlie's closest friend and caregiver, who is fiercely protective and deeply frustrated. Liz's character is rich with complexity. She scolds Charlie for his self-destructive habits, begs him to get help, but never abandons him. She is trapped in this painful cycle of trying to save someone who may not want to be saved. Through Liz, the story shows us the heartbreak of loving someone who seems determined to disappear. Their friendship feels real, messy, and filled with years of unspoken pain. Liz's exhaustion and stubborn loyalty become another powerful thread in the story. Adding another layer is Thomas, a young missionary who shows up at Charlie's door, thinking he's there to offer spiritual salvation. But the story flips this expectation on its head. Thomas is not the hero who swoops in to fix Charlie's life. Instead, his presence forces both of them to confront uncomfortable truths about belief, forgiveness, and what it really means to save someone. Their conversations start to peel back layers of both their lives, revealing that Thomas's mission may be less about Charlie's redemption and more about his own need to escape his past. The way the story reveals Charlie's history is one of its most powerful narrative choices. It doesn't present his life story in long flashbacks or through a voiceover. Instead, it slowly unpacks the past through painful, halting conversations, awkward silences, and occasional bursts of raw honesty. The film uses these small moments to let the truth leak out in pieces. We come to understand Charlie's guilt over abandoning his family, his grief over losing his partner, and his quiet, desperate attempts to find one last meaningful connection before it's too late. The pacing is patient, and the story trusts the audience to sit with the discomfort, to feel the awkward pauses, and to understand that real-life reconciliation does not happen in neat, cinematic scenes. One of the most brilliant narrative tools is the recurring essay that Charlie clings to throughout the story. This essay, which initially seems like just a random piece of writing, becomes a lifeline, a symbol, and ultimately a key that unlocks the emotional heart of the film. The way the story circles back to this essay, building its meaning layer by layer, gives it an enormous emotional payoff when its true significance is finally revealed. It's not a twist in the traditional sense, but it hits with the same force because it reframes everything we've seen and felt up to that point. The turning points in the story are not built on big cinematic moments, but on the smallest things. A door opening, a plate of food left untouched, a brutal sentence spoken in anger, or a quiet act of kindness. These are the moments where the story changes direction, and where characters reveal who they truly are. The conflicts are not battles in the physical sense but emotional battles, with each character wrestling against their own guilt, shame, grief, and anger. The film keeps pushing these characters into situations where they are forced to face their rawest emotions. And the story thrives in these deeply uncomfortable spaces. As the film moves toward its final act, the emotional intensity builds like an unstoppable wave. There is no rush in the pacing, no sudden acceleration, but every conversation, every step, every tear carries more weight than the last. The narrative never tries to manipulate the audience with over-the-top drama. Instead, it trusts in the quiet power of honest human connection and emotional vulnerability. The story's brilliance lies in its simplicity, its refusal to dress itself up with complex storytelling tricks. It stays grounded in Charlie's present, and in doing so, it grips the audience and refuses to let go. The entire narrative feels like a slow, careful excavation of one man's life, where every layer reveals something more heartbreaking, more human, and more essential. It is like watching someone try to build a bridge across a canyon of regret, one fragile piece at a time, never knowing if they will reach the other side. The story may be told in a straight line, but the emotional journey is filled with twists, falls, and powerful revelations. It is not about what happens next, it is about what is felt next. And the deeper the story goes, the more it pulls the audience into a space that is personal, painful, and unforgettable. The characters in The Whale, 2022, are more than just players in a story. They are walking, breathing portraits of human pain, longing, failure, and complicated love. The film doesn't give us characters who exist just to push the plot forward. Instead, it offers us people who feel as though they've lived entire lives long before we ever meet them. Every moment, every word, every silence feels like the tip of a much deeper emotional iceberg, And as the story unfolds, we start to see just how much each of these characters is carrying beneath the surface. Charlie is at the heart of it all. When we first meet him, he seems physically trapped in his own body, but the real prison is his mind and his memories. He has closed himself off from the world, buried in guilt, and is slowly allowing himself to fade away. But here's the beautiful part. Charlie isn't simply a man waiting to die. Even in his despair, he clings to the tiniest thread of hope, and that hope is his daughter Ellie. Charlie's character is driven by this desperate need to do something good, to make one last meaningful connection before it's too late. His development isn't about shedding weight or achieving some dramatic external goal. It's about peeling back the emotional layers he's wrapped around himself. As the story progresses, we see him taking emotional risks, reaching out in vulnerable ways, and daring to hope that his daughter might forgive him. He is constantly battling against his self-hatred, and his journey is filled with heartbreaking setbacks. But what makes Charlie so fascinating is that he doesn't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. His arc is about learning to believe, even for a moment, that he deserves one last chance to be truly seen and understood. Ellie is a whirlwind of emotions from the moment she bursts into Charlie's life. She isn't interested in polite conversation or carefully measured steps toward forgiveness. She comes in with sharp words, raw anger, and years of unresolved hurt. Ellie is, on the surface, the kind of character who would be easy to dislike. She's rude, confrontational, and at times, seems to enjoy watching her father squirm under the weight of his guilt. But the genius of her character is that this harsh exterior is just a mask. Underneath all that anger is a child who feels abandoned, who has built up walls so high that she can barely see over them anymore. As we watch her clash with Charlie, we start to notice the cracks in her armor. She is not immune to his efforts. She is not indifferent to his pain. She pretends not to care, but her actions betray her. Her growth is not a sudden transformation into a loving daughter. It's a painful, awkward, but honest journey toward maybe, just maybe, allowing herself to connect again. Ellie's character forces us to confront the idea that forgiveness doesn't come in neat packages. Sometimes it comes in fragments, in half-finished sentences, in moments that almost slip away. Liz is the steady, fiery presence in Charlie's life. She is his friend, his caretaker, his lifeline. Liz is tough on Charlie, constantly urging him to get help, to fight for his life, but her toughness is a shield. She loves him, and that love terrifies her because she knows she can't save him. Liz is caught in this brutal emotional trap where she wants to fix him, but she also knows he may not want to be fixed. Her character is beautifully layered because she isn't simply the loyal friend or the scolding nurse. She is someone who is carrying her own grief, her own guilt, her own exhaustion. Liz's development isn't loud or obvious. It's in the small ways she lets her guard down, in the quiet moments where her frustration melts into tears, in the way her anger is just a thin layer covering her fear of losing Charlie. Her relationship with him is complicated because it's not just about care. It's about history, about shared loss, and about the weight of loving someone who may already be slipping away. Thomas, the young missionary, arrives with what seems like a simple purpose: to save Charlie's soul. But very quickly, the story flips this expectation. Thomas is not some pure, unshakable believer. He is a young man running from his own mistakes, his own guilt, trying to patch over his past by throwing himself into this mission of saving others. His character becomes more interesting as Charlie begins to challenge him, forcing him to look inward instead of preaching outward. Thomas's development is not about him fixing Charlie. It's about him realizing that his own life is broken, and that the answers he thought he had might not be as solid as he believed. His moments of honesty, where he confesses his own failures, are subtle but powerful shifts in his character. He starts as someone who thinks he has all the solutions, and ends as someone who is just as lost as the people he's trying to help. Even Mary, Charlie's ex-wife, who appears briefly in the story, carries an emotional weight that lingers long after she leaves the screen. Her presence is not about giving us a simple answer about who is right or wrong in their failed marriage. Mary is tired, bitter, but still tied to Charlie in a way she can't completely untangle. When she and Charlie talk, there's no shouting, no screaming, just the heavy silence of people who know each other too well, who have hurt each other too deeply, and who still, in some hidden corner of their hearts, care about each other. Her character adds another dimension to Charlie's story, showing how the ripples of his choices have touched not just Ellie, but everyone who once loved him. What's remarkable about The Whale is that none of these characters experience neat, storybook growth. Charlie doesn't magically heal. Ellie doesn't instantly forgive. Liz doesn't find peace. Thomas doesn't walk away with all the answers. The film embraces the messiness of real human change, where people move forward in tiny, uncomfortable steps, and sometimes backward, and sometimes they simply remain stuck. The characters grow by confronting hard truths, by sitting in uncomfortable silences, by having conversations they would rather avoid. Their relationships shift in small but meaningful ways. Charlie and Ellie go from icy distance to a fragile connection. Liz goes from fierce protection to quiet resignation. Thomas goes from certain preacher to uncertain young man. The beauty of their development is that it feels alive. It feels real. No one is reduced to a simple label. Ellie is not just the angry daughter. Liz is not just the best friend. Thomas is not just the missionary. Mary is not just the ex-wife. Charlie is not just the dying man. They are all people carrying the weight of their pasts, making mistakes, hoping for connection, and sometimes failing to find it. The film lets them be flawed, complex, and heartbreakingly human. It gives them space to stumble, to hurt each other, to try, and to reach for moments of understanding in a world that doesn't always offer second chances. Their growth may not lead to perfect endings, but it leads to something even more valuable: honest, raw, and unforgettable human connection. The performances in The Whale, 2022, are the very soul of the film. They are not simply actors stepping into their roles. They are the lifeblood that makes the story pulse, ache, and breathe. Every moment in this film feels alive, because of how completely the actors vanish into their characters. They don't just deliver lines. They communicate with their eyes, their silences, their trembling hands, their exhausted sighs, and the emotional weight they carry in every inch of their bodies. The cast does not allow you to sit comfortably as a distant viewer. They pull you inside the apartment and make you sit with their pain, their regrets, and their desperate searches for connection. Brendan Fraser's performance as Charlie is more than just a comeback. It is a complete surrender to the character's emotional and physical reality. It would have been easy to play Charlie as a simple victim of circumstance, but Fraser gives him so much depth, so much tenderness, and so much raw vulnerability that it becomes impossible to reduce Charlie to just his physical condition. Fraser's performance is soaked in guilt, but never drowns in it. His eyes constantly carry the weight of all the things left unsaid, and there's a beautiful contradiction in the way he speaks, sometimes full of careful patience, sometimes barely able to control his breathing, and sometimes desperate, pleading, and gasping for air as if each sentence could be his last chance to reach the people he loves. Fraser makes Charlie both heartbreaking and deeply lovable. He never plays for sympathy, but his honesty and emotional openness make you feel for him anyway. Even in Charlie's most self-destructive moments, Fraser brings a warmth and a spark of humor that stops the character from ever becoming a symbol of tragedy. His performance is textured, layered, and completely immersive. You don't just watch Charlie. You feel every beat of his exhaustion, every ounce of his hope, and every moment where he clings to the belief that there is still something beautiful left in his life. Sadie Sink explodes onto the screen as Ellie, and her performance is like a fire that refuses to be controlled. She captures the fierce, unfiltered anger of a teenager who feels completely abandoned by her father. But what's brilliant about her portrayal is that she never allows Ellie to be a caricature of teenage rage. Sink gives Ellie a sharpness, but she also allows the tiniest cracks of vulnerability to slip through when you least expect them. Ellie's cruelty is not random. It is carefully constructed armor, and Sadie Sink knows exactly when to let that armor slip. She plays Ellie with a rhythm that constantly keeps you off balance. One moment she's stabbing Charlie with cruel words. The next she's quietly lingering just a little longer than she needs to, almost as if she doesn't really want to leave. Sink's performance refuses to give in to simple redemption. She allows Ellie to remain difficult, to remain a storm, but she also gives us just enough glimpses of Ellie's pain to remind us that behind every angry outburst is a desperate girl who just wants her father to prove that he won't leave her again. Chau's portrayal of Liz is a masterclass in restraint and emotional control. She is the beating pulse that keeps Charlie's life going, but she carries her own unbearable weight. Chau's Liz is sharp, quick-witted, and at times brutally honest, but every sarcastic jab and frustrated outburst hides the terror of watching her friend die in front of her. Chau makes Liz's love for Charlie feel completely real. It's not performative or over the top. It's the love of someone who is exhausted, who has seen too much, and who still keeps showing up because she cannot bear to walk away. Her performance is packed with small, heartbreaking details. The way her voice tightens when she's close to breaking, the way she forces herself to be practical when all she wants to do is cry, the way she hides her trembling hands by busying herself with routine tasks. Chau brings to Liz a complicated grief that lives in the present, not just in the past. Her scenes with Fraser are some of the film's most powerful moments. Filled with a tenderness that is so carefully guarded, it becomes even more precious when it finally slips through. Simpkins delivers a beautifully nuanced performance as Thomas, the young missionary who believes he is there to save Charlie. At first, Thomas seems awkward and almost naive, clinging to his religious mission with an urgency that feels rehearsed. But as the story unfolds, Simpkins reveals that Thomas is not the savior he imagines himself to be. He is running from his own guilt, his own failures, and his own desperate need to feel forgiven. Simpkins plays Thomas with just the right amount of nervous energy, balancing his polite, hopeful exterior with the shaky, uncertain boy underneath. His performance slowly unravels Thomas's layers, showing us a young man who is lost, searching, and ultimately learning that sometimes the people you think you are saving are the ones who end up saving you. Samantha Morton's performance as Mary, though brief, carries immense weight. She doesn't need a long monologue to make an impact. Morton plays Mary with the quiet exhaustion of someone who has fought all the battles, cried all the tears, and now stands at the edge of emotional collapse. Her delivery is controlled, but her eyes betray her sadness. Morton brings a depth to Mary that makes her more than just the ex-wife. She becomes a reminder of all the broken pieces Charlie left behind. In just a few scenes, Morton and Fraser create the undeniable sense of a shared history, a complicated love that still lingers beneath years of pain. What's truly extraordinary about the performances in The Whale is how perfectly they fit together. The cast works like an emotional orchestra, each bringing their own rhythm, their own key, but always harmonizing in a way that builds a cohesive, powerful whole. The actors never compete for attention. They listen to each other, they react to each other, and they allow the silences between them to carry as much meaning as the dialogue. The way they fill the small, confined space of Charlie's apartment with such emotional intensity makes the film feel almost suffocating at times, but that's what makes it so gripping. The performances are so real, so raw, that you almost feel like you shouldn't be watching, that you've accidentally stumbled into someone else's private moments of grief, anger, and fragile hope. There's no scene that feels artificial, no line that feels like it's just there to fill space. Every word matters, every look carries weight, and every performance builds on the one before it. The actors bring the story to life not by making it larger than life, but by making it painfully, beautifully human. These performances don't just elevate the film. They are the film. They are the reason you feel trapped in that apartment with Charlie. The reason you feel every ounce of regret and every desperate attempt to connect before time runs out. They are the reason the story lingers with you long after the credits roll. The direction of The Whale, 2022, is not just about guiding a story from beginning to end. It's about building an entire emotional atmosphere where every frame, every silence, and every breath is saturated with meaning. Darren Aronofsky, a director famous for his intense, often chaotic visual storytelling in films like Requiem for a Dream and Black Swan, takes a completely different approach here. He strips everything down to the barest essentials, and instead of focusing on the spectacular, he locks the audience inside one apartment and slowly turns the emotional pressure up to an almost unbearable degree. This is not a film where the drama comes from the outside world crashing in. It's a film where the real storm is happening inside the characters, and Aronofsky's direction makes sure you feel every ripple of that storm. Aronofsky deliberately chooses to confine the entire story within the four walls of Charlie's apartment. He doesn't cut away to flashbacks, he doesn't take the audience outside for relief, and he doesn't use location changes to artificially inject energy into the narrative. Instead, he turns this small, claustrophobic space into a living, breathing world. The apartment itself becomes a character. It creaks, it breathes, it traps, and it holds memories in its worn-out furniture and cluttered corners. By keeping the audience physically trapped alongside Charlie, Aronofsky forces you to experience his isolation firsthand. The walls seem to slowly close in, and the repetitive layout of the apartment makes you feel how limited Charlie's life has become. This choice is not just a stylistic constraint. It's a powerful emotional tool that perfectly mirrors Charlie's emotional entrapment and his refusal to face the outside world. The pacing of the film is where Aronofsky really flexes his mastery of emotional storytelling. He refuses to rush. Scenes unfold in real time, with long pauses, with breathy silences, with moments where nothing seems to be happening except people trying, and failing, to say the right thing. These silences are not empty. They are heavy, full of things left unsaid, full of tension and weight that builds and builds. Aronofsky knows exactly when to let the audience sit in these moments, making you lean in, making you hold your breath, making you feel the discomfort that the characters themselves are drowning in. There are no frantic cuts or artificial spikes in tension. Instead, the film moves at the exact pace of Charlie's life, slow, labored, and quietly desperate. The result is a rhythm that feels intensely real, where you feel like you are not just watching a story unfold, but living it alongside the characters. Aronofsky's shot composition is masterfully controlled and deeply intentional. He often frames Charlie in ways that make him seem overwhelmingly large within the small apartment, visually communicating how trapped he is in his own body and how his physical presence fills the space. The tight, almost suffocating framing keeps the audience pressed close to the characters, especially Charlie. Aronofsky does not allow you to drift into comfortable distance. He puts you so close that you can see the sweat on Charlie's brow, the tremble in his hands, the flicker of sadness in his eyes. When the camera does pull back, the space around Charlie often feels empty and distant, making him seem even more isolated within his own home. The 4:3 aspect ratio is one of Aronofsky's boldest and most effective stylistic decisions. This almost square frame further squeezes the characters visually, reducing their space, limiting their movement, and intensifying the claustrophobic atmosphere. It creates the feeling that the characters are boxed in from all sides, not just physically, but emotionally. It also draws the audience's focus directly to faces and body language, pulling you closer to the emotional core of each scene. The square framing creates an almost portrait-like quality, turning moments into intimate, painfully close studies of human expression and unspoken feelings. It's not just a visual choice, it's a psychological one, locking you into the tight, inescapable world of Charlie's apartment. Lighting plays a crucial role in Aronofsky's direction. He keeps the lighting soft, muted and natural, creating a world that feels dim and overcast, like the sun has long forgotten to fully shine into this space. The apartment is bathed in warm but fading light, which gives the film a tender, melancholic glow. The shadows linger just enough to suggest the emotional weight hanging in every corner. Aronofsky uses the lighting not to dramatize the space, but to let it quietly absorb the sadness, the warmth, and the isolation that define Charlie's life. It feels lived in, worn down, and untouched by the outside world, as if time has stopped inside this place. What makes Aronofsky's direction so powerful is his refusal to sentimentalize or manipulate. He does not craft emotional moments to force tears from the audience. He lets them arrive naturally, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with jagged edges. He trusts the story, the script, and the actors to carry the emotional weight without dressing it up in unnecessary cinematic tricks. He never shies away from showing Charlie's physical reality, but he never sensationalizes it either. The camera approaches Charlie with honesty, with empathy, and with quiet observation. Aronofsky makes it clear that Charlie's story is not one of spectacle but of humanity. He is not asking the audience to gawk. He is asking them to see. One of Aronofsky's most impressive achievements is how he directs the emotional energy of the cast. The performances feel raw and unscripted, and that's no accident. Aronofsky creates a space where the actors can take their time, where their pauses, their stumbles, their uncomfortable silences are all embraced and allowed to breathe. The emotional pacing is not forced. Characters don't suddenly blurt out the things they've been holding back. Instead, they wrestle with their words, they dance around their truths, They let their bodies do as much talking as their mouths. Aronofsky's direction invites this naturalistic flow, where the tension builds quietly, sometimes so slowly you don't realize how heavy it's become until it suddenly collapses in a wave of raw emotion. There is an elegance to how Aronofsky balances the film's oppressive sadness with moments of humor and humanity. These moments never feel out of place. They arise from the characters, from their awkwardness, from their long, shared histories. He lets the film breathe just enough so that it doesn't collapse under the weight of its own sorrow. These flickers of humor and awkward grace add complexity, showing that even in the darkest spaces, life is not purely tragic. It's messy, it's strange, and sometimes it's unexpectedly funny. Aronofsky's control over the narrative vision is unshakable. He never once drifts from the story's emotional core. Every scene, every camera movement, every beat of silence is in service of this exploration of human connection, forgiveness, and the brutal honesty of facing the end of life. He doesn't distract with subplots or outside noise. He zeroes in on Charlie's apartment, Charlie's body, Charlie's attempt to salvage a relationship with his daughter, and he never lets the audience escape from that intensity. Aronofsky builds the film like a pressure cooker. Quiet, contained, but always simmering with emotion just under the surface, until it finally bursts in quiet, devastating waves. The cinematography in The Whale, 2022, is not just a technical layer resting on top of the story. It becomes a living, breathing extension of the film's emotional core. Matthew Libatique doesn't simply capture the action. He translates feelings into visuals, framing the entire narrative in a way that forces the viewer to step inside Charlie's world and sit with every ounce of his emotional and physical weight. This is cinematography that doesn't scream for attention. It quietly pulls you in, tightens around you, and refuses to let you drift away. Every choice, from the camera's angle to the lighting to the color palette, is intentional and precise, designed to bring the audience as close as possible to the raw human experience unfolding on screen. The decision to use the 4:3 aspect ratio is one of the most quietly brilliant strokes in the film's visual language. This nearly square frame immediately changes how the viewer processes space. It limits horizontal movement, boxes the characters in, and creates a visual cage that mirrors Charlie's trapped life. It doesn't just make the apartment feel small, it makes the world feel small. It removes the usual cinematic width and pushes everything inward, forcing the focus onto Charlie's body, his face, his breath. This frame heightens the intimacy in a way that a wider aspect ratio never could. It places the audience directly in front of the characters, often with nothing else in the shot but them and their pain. There's nowhere to run, nowhere for the eye to wander, nowhere to hide from what's being shown. The walls seem closer, the ceilings feel lower, and every movement feels heavier and more labored within this tight visual space. The apartment itself becomes more than a setting. It transforms into an emotional echo chamber, and Libatique's cinematography turns this confined space into something that feels almost alive. The camera knows when to drift slowly, when to creep through doorways, when to simply stay still. There's an incredible patience in the way the film is shot. The cinematography doesn't chase the characters around with rapid cuts or flashy camera work. It settles in, like another quiet observer in the room, watching, breathing, waiting for the emotional waves to rise and crash. There are long, uninterrupted takes where the camera just holds. On Charlie's exhausted breathing, on Ellie's tightening jaw, on Liz's trembling hands. And these moments hit with brutal force because the camera refuses to rescue the viewer from the discomfort. The lighting is another essential storyteller in this film. Libatique bathes the apartment in soft, natural light that feels like it's leaking in from an outside world that Charlie has long abandoned. The way the light filters through the curtains, the way it catches dust in the air, the way it fades unevenly across the walls. These details create an atmosphere that is both tender and suffocating. The lighting never chases brightness. It stays low, often allowing shadows to dominate the edges of the frame. The apartment feels like it has its own kind of twilight, a slow, permanent dimming that echoes Charlie's fading health and his limited time. This dim, gentle lighting creates a visual mood that holds everything in a constant state of quiet sadness, as though even the sun isn't sure if it should fully enter this space. There are moments where the light shifts, just barely, in ways that carry enormous emotional weight. For example, when Charlie opens the blinds or when the door briefly swings open to the outside. The sudden injection of brighter light doesn't feel like a random visual change. It feels like the world pushing its way in, reminding Charlie that life still exists beyond his self-imposed prison. Le Boutique uses these moments sparingly, which makes them resonate even more when they arrive. The camera angles throughout the film are carefully chosen to emphasize not just Charlie's physicality, but his emotional state. There are shots where the camera sits low, nearly at floor level, looking up at Charlie as he struggles to stand or move. These angles never feel like they are there to shock or belittle. They are there to convey effort, to make the viewer feel the weight and the difficulty of basic movement. The audience is invited to feel the strain, to feel the tension in Charlie's body, to experience what he experiences. Le Boutique avoids exploitative framing. He never uses the camera to reduce Charlie to his body alone. Instead, he finds a delicate balance, showing Charlie's struggle with honesty while never stripping him of his dignity. When it comes to faces, the cinematography shifts into an almost portrait-like style. There are tight close-ups that don't just capture emotion. They force the audience to sit in it. Sadie Sink's performance as Ellie is often captured in these close, unblinking frames, especially in moments when she's caught between anger and grief. Le Boutique knows exactly when to hold the camera on her, allowing the smallest flickers of hesitation, the tiniest changes in her breathing to fill the frame with tension. The same approach is used with Liz. Her exhaustion, her love, her frustration, all unfold in these tight, patient shots that never cut away too soon. These close-ups aren't about being visually aggressive. They are about pulling the viewer closer and closer, until you can almost feel the heartbeat in the room. The movement of the camera is another subtle strength. Le Boutique doesn't move the camera for the sake of movement. When the camera glides, it does so carefully, often following a character at a respectful distance, as if unsure whether it should intrude. At times, the camera simply watches, locked in place, letting the characters drift in and out of the frame, reinforcing the idea that this apartment is a space where emotional weight is always present, even when people aren't talking. When characters leave the room, the camera sometimes stays behind, lingering on empty spaces. A chair, a half-eaten plate, a pile of papers, as if the apartment itself is holding the memory of what just happened. These moments give the cinematography a kind of emotional memory, where the physical space becomes saturated with the history of its occupants. Color is used with extreme subtlety. The apartment is filled with soft browns, faded greens, pale grays, and touches of worn beige. These muted tones wrap the film in a quiet sadness, a visual language that says this space has not been tended to, it has been survived in. The colors feel tired, as though the life has slowly drained from them over the years. Yet there are tiny splashes of life that sneak into the frame. Ellie's clothing, her notebooks, the rare moments when light briefly illuminates the room. These moments are not loud, but they stand out against the backdrop of emotional and visual heaviness, hinting at the life that still stubbornly lingers in this story. Le Boutique's cinematography is filled with patience, precision, and a quiet kind of emotional bravery. It doesn't rely on visual tricks or overwhelming compositions. Instead, it sits with the characters, it listens, it breathes alongside them. The visual approach is perfectly aligned with the story's emotional rhythm, slow, heavy, intimate, and unrelenting. The camera serves as both a companion and a silent witness, capturing the smallest moments of grace, regret, and connection. It turns a small apartment into a vast emotional space, where every glance, every step, every breath carries the full weight of what these characters are fighting to say before time runs out. The editing and pacing in The Whale, 2022, are not designed to entertain in the traditional sense. They are crafted to immerse the viewer so deeply into Charlie's life that the film's slow rhythm becomes a kind of emotional gravity pulling you closer and closer to him. Editor Andrew Weisblum shapes the entire flow of the story with a deliberate stillness, allowing the film to breathe in long, heavy stretches, making the silences, pauses, and everyday moments feel just as significant as the most emotionally charged scenes. The film doesn't glide through its story. It sits. It lingers. It makes the viewer feel every second passing by as if the walls of the apartment are closing in, one quiet beat at a time. From the very first moments, the editing sets the tone. There is no frantic rush to introduce characters, or build up a quick dramatic hook. Instead, the film unfolds at a human pace. The editing lets Charlie's world open slowly, as if even the film is hesitant to intrude on his isolated existence. Scenes are carefully stitched together without sharp cuts or flashy transitions. There's an organic flow, almost as if the story is happening in real time. This slow rhythm forces the viewer to stay in each moment longer than is comfortable. Weisblum doesn't rescue the audience from awkward silences or painful pauses. He holds those silences, amplifying their weight until the audience has no choice but to lean in, to sit with the characters as they hesitate, stumble, or fail to find the right words. What's striking is that the editing does not follow the conventional rhythm of emotional buildup and release that most films rely on. Weisblum often lets scenes dissolve softly, letting them trail off rather than ending them with a tight emotional punch. Scenes blend into each other, not with sharp contrasts but with a quiet, continuous pulse, as though the story is one long, unbroken breath. The pacing allows the emotional weight to accumulate slowly, layering regret, guilt, frustration, and love over time until it becomes almost too much to carry. It's like watching water rise slowly in a room. You don't notice how deep it's gotten until you realize you're submerged. The editing makes bold choices when it comes to time. It doesn't feel the need to constantly move forward. It repeats certain visual beats. Charlie struggling to stand, moving to the couch, picking up his laptop, eating, writing, trying to connect with Ellie. This repetition is not about redundancy, it's about rhythm. It emphasizes Charlie's trapped routine, the loop he's living in, where every day feels eerily similar to the last. Yet within these repetitions, Weisblum carefully weaves in subtle variations. The pace of Charlie's movements, the tone of his voice, the energy of each interaction. These tiny shifts mark emotional progress even as the physical world remains the same. There is a powerful tension in the editing's refusal to cut away from Charlie's physical struggle. When he stands, when he walks, when he gasps for breath, the editing holds those moments in real time. There are no shortcuts, no clever angles to minimize the effort, no dissolves to skip over the pain. Weisblum forces the viewer to stay with Charlie, to feel the slow grind of each step, to understand the enormity of what seems like a simple movement. This commitment to staying present is one of the film's greatest strengths. It builds a kind of emotional honesty that hits harder precisely because it never flinches or moves past the difficulty too quickly. The pacing also plays beautifully with emotional timing. Some of the most devastating moments arrive not because the editing speeds up to hit a dramatic beat, but because the editing slows down, holding just a few seconds longer than expected, making the silence itself carry the emotional blow. When Charlie and Ellie argue, when Liz confronts her own grief, when moments of connection flicker and then dissolve, the editing stays just long enough to let the weight of the words sink in, but not so long that it feels staged. Weisblum walks that razor-thin line between patience and indulgence, always keeping the story on the edge of emotional collapse without tipping into melodrama. Transitions between scenes are handled with an understated grace. The editing often moves from one scene to another without clear visual markers or musical cues. Sometimes it feels like the next scene simply drifts in, as if time in the apartment is a seamless, looping flow. There are no time jumps, no title cards, no aggressive cuts to push the story forward. It all feels continuous, like a single long afternoon that never quite ends. This seamless flow deepens the sense of confinement and intensifies the emotional atmosphere, as if Charlie's life has become one long, quiet waiting period. Even when the characters leave the room, the editing sometimes holds the shot on the empty space they've just exited. This choice lets the quiet linger, allowing the audience to feel the absence, to notice the silence that fills the room after the shouting stops. It's in these empty spaces that the emotional residue hangs the heaviest. The editing treats the apartment as more than just a setting. It treats it like a container for memory and regret. When scenes fade out, it feels less like the story is moving on and more like the apartment is absorbing the energy of what just happened. Weisblum also uses editing to control the emotional pacing of the performances. Ellie's words often come in rapid-fire bursts, filled with sharp edges and impatience. The editing allows her rhythm to run free in these moments, making her energy feel overwhelming and unavoidable. Then, just as suddenly, the film sinks back into Charlie's pace, slower, more deliberate, heavy with unspoken emotion. The way the editing shifts between these two rhythms, Ellie's fast, aggressive pace and Charlie's slow, careful cadence, creates a beautiful emotional push and pull throughout the film. The most incredible thing about the pacing is how it shapes the emotional exhaustion of the story. It makes the audience feel the drag of time in the same way Charlie feels it. Each conversation feels like a mountain to climb. Each movement feels monumental. Each step feels like it could be the last. The editing doesn't hide this weight. It leans into it, making the experience of watching the film a slow, deliberate descent into the heart of Charlie's world. The film's rhythm becomes part of its emotional message. It is about the slow erosion of time, the patience required to face regret, and the endurance it takes to hold on to hope when your life feels like it's slipping away. Throughout the film, the editing never rushes the audience to the next big moment. It trusts that the emotional impact will come not from speed or surprise, but from carefully sitting with each beat until it fully unfolds. It trusts that the viewer is capable of waiting, of listening, of feeling the slow burn of the story without being pulled along by conventional cinematic pacing. The result is a rhythm that is emotionally relentless in its patience, that makes every pause meaningful, that turns the act of simply sitting with a character into something unforgettable. In The Whale, the editing is not a behind-the-scenes craft, it is the heartbeat of the film. It dictates how the story breathes, how it waits, how it holds you in place until you have no choice but to feel the full weight of what the characters are going through. The soundtrack and score of The Whale, 2022, composed by Rob Simonson, are not just musical additions layered on top of the story. They are woven into the emotional fabric of the film with such precision and subtlety that they almost feel like part of the air inside Charlie's apartment. This is not the kind of soundtrack that competes with the dialogue or announces itself with loud themes. It is the kind of music that feels like it has always been there, softly pulsing underneath every breath, every hesitation, every tear. Simonson understands that the story doesn't need to be pushed along by big musical moments. It needs to be gently supported, carefully held, and sometimes completely left alone. The score is a quiet companion, one that knows when to step in and when to simply fade away, trusting silence to do the work. The score moves with a light touch, often using delicate piano melodies, soft strings and ambient tones that seem to seep through the walls rather than crash through the story. The music feels as if it's echoing from some distant part of Charlie's mind. A quiet memory, a forgotten hope, a lingering sadness that has followed him for years. The compositions don't press themselves onto the scenes. They drift in like a slow fog, wrapping themselves around the characters without ever overpowering them. This restraint is one of the most remarkable things about Simonson's work here. He avoids all the predictable tricks of swelling orchestras or abrupt musical shifts. He leans into minimalism, allowing the simplicity of the notes to carry enormous emotional weight without ever telling the audience exactly what to feel. One of the most beautiful aspects of the soundtrack is its use of recurring musical motifs that are so subtle they almost seem like ghostly echoes rather than fully formed themes. These motifs gently appear at key emotional moments, sometimes connected to Charlie's reflections, sometimes tied to his interactions with Ellie or Liz. The repetition is not obvious. It doesn't scream for recognition, but if you pay close attention, you can feel the music revisiting certain emotional spaces as the story progresses. These quiet returns create a sense of emotional continuity, like the score is tracing the shape of Charlie's internal life, picking up pieces of his past, and carefully setting them down again in different scenes. Silence plays an equally important role in the film's soundscape. In The Whale, silence is not treated as an empty space to be filled. It is treated as part of the soundtrack itself. Simonson and director Darren Aronofsky allow entire stretches of the film to breathe in complete silence, especially during moments of confrontation, grief, or personal reflection. These silences are not accidental. They are crafted to carry weight. When Charlie struggles to stand, when he tries to connect with Ellie, when he faces his own isolation, the absence of music becomes deafening. The silence allows the sound of his breathing, the creaking of the apartment, and the distant hum of life outside to come forward. These sounds become part of the emotional rhythm, making the viewer feel the heaviness of each passing second. What's particularly striking is how the soundtrack rarely builds to loud emotional peaks. Even in the story's most intense moments, Simonson's music remains calm, controlled, and deeply intimate. When the film reaches its emotional climax, the score doesn't explode, it quietly swells, as if the music itself is holding its breath alongside the characters. This decision to hold back, to resist the temptation of a grand musical release, makes the emotional moments feel raw and unfiltered. The audience is not told how to feel with big orchestral cues. Instead, they are invited to sit in the emotion, to feel the ache, to process the pain and hope without being pushed toward a prepackaged response. The textures of the music are incredibly thoughtful. The piano is soft and deliberate, each note spaced out with care, as if the music is walking carefully through Charlie's fragile world. The strings do not soar. They hover, they hum, they vibrate gently beneath the surface of the scene. The ambient layers are so faint at times they almost feel like they are part of the room's natural sound. This attention to texture makes the soundtrack feel like it belongs inside the apartment. It doesn't come from outside the story. It feels like it has been there, quietly waiting, quietly listening, for as long as Charlie has. The soundtrack also plays with distance in fascinating ways. Sometimes the music feels like it is up close, sitting right beside the characters. Other times, it feels like it is drifting in from far away, as if it's coming from another room or from a memory that Charlie can barely hold on to. This shifting distance adds a subtle emotional layer to the storytelling, as if the music is not just following the characters, but is actively participating in their internal struggles. When Ellie lashes out, when Liz fights to hold her composure, when Charlie desperately searches for connection, the music carefully adjusts its distance, its softness, its presence, always staying perfectly in tune with the emotional temperature of the scene. There are also moments where the score blends so seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the apartment that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The distant rain, the creaks of the floor, the soft rumble of Charlie's breathing, all of these natural sounds are treated with the same respect as the composed music. Sometimes the score simply slides in beneath these sounds, adding a thin, almost invisible layer of emotion that supports the scene without drawing attention to itself. This seamless blending creates an incredibly immersive experience where the apartment, the characters, the music, and the silence all feel like one connected, breathing world. The film's approach to sound also relies on timing. Simonson doesn't drop music into a scene as soon as something emotional happens. Often, the music arrives a beat or two later, as if it's cautiously following the character's lead, waiting to see how they will respond before gently stepping in. This creates a natural, organic flow where the soundtrack feels like a quiet echo of the character's emotional states rather than a pre-planned musical cue. This careful timing makes the score feel honest, patient, and respectful of the story's delicate emotional spaces. Even though the score is minimalist, it is never cold or distant. There's a warmth in the way Simonson uses his instruments, a softness that wraps around the story like a protective layer. The music does not judge the characters, it does not rush them, and it does not demand emotional responses from the audience. Instead, it simply exists alongside them, like a quiet friend who sits with you in your hardest moments without needing to say a word. The soundtrack's greatest strength is its humility. It never tries to dominate the film or to compete with the performances. It understands its role, to hold space, to guide gently, to leave room for silence, and to let the story's emotional truth shine through on its own. The music in The Whale feels like it belongs to Charlie's world, like it has always been part of the walls, the air, the memories, and the quiet battles he faces every day. It is a soundtrack that knows how to stay close without smothering, how to linger without overstaying, and how to speak volumes without ever raising its voice. The Whale, 2022, unfolds like an emotional maze, packed with layered themes that don't just surface in dramatic conversations, but soak into the silences, the spaces between words, and the smallest gestures of the characters. This is not a film that waves its themes in front of the audience. It buries them, lets them simmer, and slowly pulls them to the surface through the weight of the story and the relentless vulnerability of its characters. The film speaks deeply about guilt, but not in a simple, one-dimensional way. Charlie's guilt is the axis around which everything spins. His guilt isn't just about leaving his family, it's about how he responded to that guilt, how he let it consume him, how he locked himself inside his apartment and his own body, almost as though he believes he deserves the slow, painful fate he's chosen. The way the film presents guilt is brutal. It shows how it can shape a life, how it can drive a person to sabotage themselves not out of hate, but out of a strange, quiet form of self-punishment. Guilt becomes Charlie's shadow, following him through every conversation, every meal, every failed attempt to reach his daughter. And then there's the aching theme of forgiveness, but the film doesn't hand it over in a neat, emotional package. Forgiveness here is not a soft, warm answer. It's a jagged, uncertain, fragile possibility. Charlie desperately wants Ellie to forgive him, but the story doesn't pretend that wanting forgiveness means you automatically get it. Ellie's rage is not something that can be soothed with apologies, and Charlie's self-loathing is not something that magically dissolves because he's trying to reconnect. The film plays with the uncomfortable question: what if forgiveness never comes? What if the people you've hurt don't have the space or the willingness to let you off the hook? The power in this theme comes from how the film lets it hang unresolved. There are no clear victories here. Sometimes forgiveness is attempted. Sometimes it is withheld. Sometimes it's buried under layers of sarcasm, anger, or silence. And sometimes, maybe, it's found in the smallest moments: a glance, a shared memory, a fleeting connection that no one says out loud. The film also tackles the raw theme of self-destruction, but it does it in a way that makes it almost tender. Charlie's eating is not sensationalized. It's not treated like a spectacle or a shock factor. It's shown as something deeply connected to his grief and his guilt. It's his way of coping, punishing, surviving, numbing, sometimes all at once. The story never frames Charlie as a passive victim of his body. It shows how he actively participates in his own decline, and yet it holds him with compassion, not judgment. The film makes the viewer confront the messy truth that people don't always fight to save themselves. Sometimes they lean into the very things that are destroying them because it gives them a strange, painful comfort. Self-destruction here is not about recklessness. It's about how sorrow can slowly convince someone that there's no other path left. Another powerful undercurrent is the theme of isolation. Charlie's apartment is a physical symbol of the walls he has built around himself. He has cut himself off from the outside world, both by circumstance and by choice. His interactions are limited, his life is confined, and his emotional world has become suffocatingly small. The film doesn't paint this isolation as a quirk or a plot device. It makes the audience sit in it, feel it, understand it. Isolation here is both a cage and a refuge. Charlie finds safety in his solitude, but it's also the thing that's killing him. The film digs into how isolation can twist a person's sense of reality, how it can magnify regrets, and how it can make even the smallest connection feel monumental. Throughout the story, the film relentlessly circles the question of whether people are inherently good. Charlie's repeated insistence that people are amazing is heartbreaking because it's both his greatest hope and possibly his greatest delusion. He clings to this belief even when evidence seems to suggest otherwise. The film challenges this idea by surrounding Charlie with characters who are complicated, angry, selfish, loving, and broken in their own ways. Ellie is a hurricane of anger and manipulation, but she is also desperate for her father's attention. Liz is protective and caring, but she is drowning in her own grief and enabling Charlie's self-destruction. Thomas, the missionary, is awkwardly trying to save someone who may not want saving. No one in this story is purely good or bad. They're all messy, contradictory, and painfully human. The film pushes the viewer to question: is Charlie right? Are people amazing? Or is he simply holding on to this belief because it's the only thing he has left? Honesty, another central theme, pulses throughout the film with relentless urgency. Charlie's obsession with honesty is not just an academic principle, it's his emotional lifeline. He urges his students to write honestly, to strip away pretension, to get to the raw, uncomfortable truth. He begs Ellie to be honest with him, to say what she really feels. Charlie doesn't have time left for polite lies or easy answers. The film presents honesty as something brutal but beautiful. Honesty here isn't clean, it's awkward, it's painful, it's sometimes cruel. The characters lash out with honest words that wound, but there's a strange comfort in that honesty because at least it's real. Charlie seems to believe that if he can just find something truly honest, If someone can say something honest to him, it will mean his life had some kind of weight, some kind of purpose. Grief is another layer that wraps around every character like an invisible fog. Charlie's grief for his partner doesn't explode in loud, dramatic breakdowns. It seeps into his daily life, into his rituals, into the way he eats, the way he speaks, the way he refuses to leave his apartment. Liz carries her own grief, which shapes her fierce protectiveness over Charlie and her simmering frustration at his refusal to save himself. The film treats grief as something that never fully leaves. It just becomes part of you. It changes the way you move through the world, and it quietly dictates your choices long after the tears have stopped. Grief in The Whale is a slow burn. It's not just a backstory, it's an active, present force shaping every second of the narrative. The story also peels back the theme of what it means to be a parent. It shreds the easy, idealized version of fatherhood, and instead presents a raw, painful, complicated mess. Charlie loves Ellie with every fiber of his being, but love isn't enough to undo the damage. The film dives into the brutal reality that parents can fail, that children can carry that failure like a wound for years, and that trying to make amends is not always welcomed with open arms. The dynamic between Charlie and Ellie is tense, jagged, full of false starts and painful honesty. The film never promises that this relationship can be fixed, but it shows the desperate, clumsy, relentless effort Charlie puts into trying. There's also a quiet commentary about faith woven into the story, particularly through the character of Thomas. His religious mission is treated with skepticism, and the film subtly questions whether salvation can be handed out like a script or whether it has to come from within. The visual effects in The Whale, 2022, operate with an almost invisible brilliance. They are not here to dazzle, they are not here to scream for attention, and they certainly are not here to compete with the film's emotional depth. Instead, they settle into the background, perfectly woven into the fabric of the story, so seamless that most audiences may never even stop to ask where the practical effects end and the digital artistry begins. But if you slow down and really look, the visual effects in this film are quietly doing extraordinary work. They are building a body, creating weight, shaping space, and most importantly, making Charlie feel completely, heartbreakingly real. At the core of the film's visual transformation is the prosthetic suit Brendan Fraser wears. This is not just an added layer of foam or latex. It is a masterpiece of practical effects that had to achieve something incredibly specific. It had to convey not just size, but texture, softness, tension, fatigue, and above all, the lived-in truth of Charlie's physical reality. The prosthetic suit is crafted with astonishing detail. Folds of skin that respond naturally to movement, delicate variations in skin tone that catch light in believable ways, subtle indications of pressure when Charlie shifts his weight, and even the faint sheen of perspiration that makes the skin appear alive. It's not just about appearance, it's about interaction. The suit had to move like a part of Brendan Fraser's own body. When he struggles to stand, when he lowers himself into his chair, when his arms rest heavily on his lap, the suit must compress, sag, and hold weight in a way that mimics human flesh. It's these small, intricate visual cues that build the illusion. But practical effects, no matter how skillfully designed, cannot work in isolation. The genius of The Whale lies in the marriage between practical craftsmanship and digital precision. The visual effects team stepped in to polish, refine, and erase the subtle seams that could have betrayed the prosthetic's artificiality. They digitally softened edges where the suit might have otherwise stood apart from Fraser's face and natural body movements. They made sure that the transitions from skin to prosthetic were completely invisible, that lighting blended consistently across Fraser's real skin and the fabricated layers. It's the kind of visual work that doesn't want to be seen. It wants to vanish so that Charlie can simply exist on screen as a fully realized person. And what makes these effects even more astonishing is how they interact with the environment. The apartment is not just a backdrop, it's an active part of the visual storytelling. When Charlie leans against the couch, the cushions compress with a believable resistance. When he shifts his weight on the bed, the frame creaks and bends under the strain. These are not digital add-ons for spectacle. They are essential environmental responses that ground Charlie's physical presence in reality. These small, practical touches, furniture bending, floorboards protesting, clothing stretching and creasing, all feed into the believability of the character. Without these elements, the illusion could have easily collapsed. Instead, the visual effects work together with the physical world to make every movement feel honest, to make every interaction with space feel physically truthful. The lighting in The Whale plays an unspoken role in supporting the visual effects. The lighting design was carefully engineered to flatter the prosthetics, to mask potential flaws, and to bring out the finest textures of Charlie's skin. The way natural light filters through the apartment's windows, the way shadows fall across the folds of his body, the way soft indoor lamps catch the moisture on his skin. These lighting choices allow the practical and digital effects to blend seamlessly. Poor lighting would have betrayed the artificial elements. Here it enhances them, making Charlie's body feel fully integrated into his world. The digital artistry also extended to fine-tuning the texture of the skin, ensuring that the appearance of pores, sweat, and subtle discolorations matched what we expect to see in real life. The visual effects team didn't chase perfection, they chased believability. They let imperfections remain. Skin is not perfectly smooth. Weight shifts in unpredictable ways. The suit and the CGI embraced this. They allowed for slight asymmetries, small inconsistencies, natural sagging. These choices make Charlie feel like a real person, not like a computer creation or an exaggerated visual trick. One of the most remarkable things about the visual effects in The Whale is how they understand the power of restraint. The film never pushes Charlie's body toward grotesque exaggeration. It never uses his size as a shock device. The camera never lingers on him in a way that feels exploitative or sensational. Instead, the visual effects respect the humanity of the character. They support a story that is about Charlie's emotions, his regrets, his hope, his connections, not just his appearance. The visual effects are there to create empathy, not to create spectacle. The digital work is so subtle, so carefully controlled, that the audience never feels the pull of CGI. There are no distracting artifacts, no moments where the viewer is suddenly reminded they're watching something artificial. The seamlessness is part of the film's success. The visual effects succeed precisely because they let the audience forget they exist. The technical achievement hides in plain sight. Even the way Charlie's breathing is visualized shows an incredible attention to detail. The rise and fall of his chest, the way his breathing labors under strain, the way his face flushes with effort. These are not random effects. They are part of a meticulously coordinated effort to make the body feel fully responsive to emotion and movement. You can see the subtle trembling in his arms when he tries to stand, the slight shaking in his hands when he reaches for something. These micro-movements are what push the visual effects from impressive to extraordinary. They capture the fragility of the character's physical state in a way that feels intimate and painfully real. The emotional weight of the visual effects is also deeply tied to how they reinforce the themes of the film. Charlie's body is not just part of his character, it is a reflection of his emotional journey. His size, his physical limitations, his struggle to move and breathe. All of these visual elements are direct expressions of his guilt, his grief, his isolation, and his longing for connection. The visual effects are not just technical flourishes, they are part of the story's emotional core. They let the audience see and feel the burden Charlie carries, not just hear about it. There's also a careful choreography in how the camera moves around Charlie. The filmmakers don't rely on quick cuts or fast-paced editing to mask visual effects. Instead, the camera lingers, it stays close, it captures Charlie in wide shots and tight close-ups without flinching. This choice demands that the visual effects hold up under scrutiny, and they do. Every close-up reinforces the realism. Every wide shot confirms the physical weight and presence. The visual effects are constantly under the microscope, and yet they never crack, never reveal the craftsmanship hiding behind them. What makes the visual effects in The Whale stand apart is their patience, their humility, and their extraordinary precision. The set design and locations in The Whale, 2022, are far more than just a physical backdrop. They are the silent narrators of Charlie's story, telling us who he is, what he's lost, how he lives, and what he clings to without needing a single line of dialogue to do it. The choice to confine the entire film to Charlie's apartment might seem simple on the surface, but the level of detail, intention, and emotional layering baked into this space is what makes the apartment pulse with life. The apartment doesn't just contain the story, It is the story. It reflects Charlie's mind, his body, his emotions, his fears, and his slow, self-imposed disappearance from the world. The way the apartment is laid out is almost a map of Charlie's limitations. The pathways between the furniture are tight, the space feels like it's closing in, and each object is placed in a way that suggests habit, routine, and necessity. There's no luxury here. Charlie doesn't need luxury. He needs survival, comfort, and a way to make it through the day. The set is filled with things that are within arm's reach: books, food, papers, medical supplies. Everything is arranged like a carefully constructed island, as though Charlie has built his own little world where he doesn't have to move too far or reach too high. The very positioning of objects tells the story of a man who is slowly shrinking his life into a smaller and smaller radius. A man who has designed his surroundings to match his physical and emotional confinement. The apartment feels heavy with the passage of time. Nothing is new. Nothing feels fresh. The couch is sagging and threadbare, the floors are scuffed, the wallpaper is faded, and the kitchen counters carry the quiet grime of years gone by. The apartment is not presented as a health hazard, but it holds the unmistakable signs of slow neglect. Not catastrophic, not chaotic, just slowly slipping into disrepair. That subtle aging of the space mirrors Charlie's own deterioration. As Charlie's body struggles under the weight of his choices, his apartment quietly echoes that struggle. Falling apart, becoming smaller, getting dimmer. It's a beautifully constructed parallel. The colors of the apartment do so much storytelling without needing to shout. The entire space is soaked in muted tones: soft browns, pale greens, tired grays, washed-out yellows. There's a warmth to the colors, but it's a faded, worn-out warmth, like the kind you'd find in an old photograph that's been left in the sun too long. These colors make the apartment feel lived in, but also emotionally heavy, like the walls themselves have absorbed Charlie's sadness. Nothing about the set feels sterile or theatrical. It feels like a real place, like a home that was once full of life but now sits in quiet surrender. One of the most powerful aspects of the set design is how the apartment interacts with light. Natural light filters in through the blinds, but even this light seems tired, struggling to fully brighten the space. The apartment never fully lights up, which fits perfectly with Charlie's emotional state. When the blinds are partially opened, there's a brief feeling of life creeping back in, but most of the time the apartment remains softly lit, shadowy, and dim. The lighting is not just atmospheric, it's emotionally loaded. The interplay of shadow and light highlights Charlie's isolation, his withdrawal from the outside world, and his complex relationship with his own reality. The windows are almost always shut or covered, acting as physical barriers between Charlie and the world he has turned his back on. The layout of the apartment is cleverly designed to emphasize Charlie's confinement. Doorways feel narrow. Hallways feel longer than they actually are, and simple movements from the couch to the door feel like monumental journeys. The way the furniture is arranged isn't just practical, it creates obstacles. Every step Charlie takes feels deliberate and exhausting, and the set forces the audience to experience that with him. The distance from the couch to the front door feels like miles. The tightness of the space constantly reminds the viewer that Charlie is trapped, not just emotionally but physically. Every prop in the apartment feels like it has a story. The small framed photographs hint at the life Charlie once had. The textbooks and essays scattered across tables aren't just random set dressings. They show us that Charlie is still clinging to his role as a teacher, still trying to engage with the world in the only way he knows how. The unopened mail, the cluttered kitchen counters, the oxygen tank sitting by his side. They all quietly reinforce the daily rhythm of Charlie's life and the slow buildup of his isolation. Even the stacks of food containers, the well-worn utensils, the crumbs on the table, these small visual cues tell us about Charlie's emotional patterns without ever needing to be explained. The set design also uses absence brilliantly. There are no bright flowers, no vibrant paintings, no signs of celebration, no decorations. It's as if Charlie has carefully stripped away anything that might remind him of joy or normalcy. The apartment is bare in a way that feels deliberate, as though Charlie has been slowly erasing the parts of his life that no longer feel relevant to him. This quiet emptiness becomes more powerful than any visual clutter could have been. These temporary disruptions while still snapping back to its familiar, isolated state once they leave. The kitchen is particularly fascinating in how it's presented. It's not a warm, social kitchen. It's a functional, emotionally loaded space. It's where Charlie's relationship with food plays out, not as comfort but as a complicated coping mechanism. The refrigerator, the counters, the visible stash of food items. These are not just part of the background. They are extensions of Charlie's internal struggle, always within view, always silently present. The kitchen's openness to the living room means Charlie's most vulnerable behaviors are never fully hidden from the audience. It's a brilliant set choice that keeps his private rituals constantly visible. The small bathroom that features in critical moments of the film is another key piece of the set. It's not elaborately designed, but its tight, confining space becomes the stage for some of Charlie's most physically and emotionally difficult scenes. The narrow doorway, the proximity of the sink and toilet, the claustrophobic walls. All these elements combine to make the bathroom a battleground where Charlie's body fights against his will. The apartment also feels timeless in an intentionally muted way. There are no glaring signs of modern technology, no flashy screens, no markers of a specific era. It feels stuck, suspended, as though time has gently passed it by. The only clear connection Charlie has to the outside world is his laptop, which feels like a lifeline more than a modern convenience. This careful design choice strips the story of distractions and focuses the viewer entirely on the emotional landscape. What makes the set design so compelling is that it never changes dramatically, but the way we feel about the space evolves with the story. Early on, the apartment feels like Charlie's fortress, his refuge. As the film progresses, it begins to feel like his prison, a place he cannot escape from, a place that is slowly closing in on him. The walls feel tighter, the shadows feel heavier, and even the familiar furniture begins to feel like barriers. The dialogue and script of The Whale, 2022, operate with a kind of emotional precision that feels both natural and deeply intentional, as if every word has been carved out of lived experience rather than written in a screenwriting program. This is not a film where characters simply talk at each other. They confront, evade, wound, soothe, lash out, and cling to words as if they're trying to make sense of pain that refuses to be tamed. The dialogue doesn't sound like movie dialogue. It sounds like people wrestling with their lives in real time, reaching for connection while dragging the weight of guilt, grief, and longing behind every syllable. What makes the script so masterful is that it gives every character their own vocabulary, cadence, and emotional rhythm. Charlie, for instance, speaks in a voice that is gentle and almost overly kind, like someone who has made a conscious decision to use warmth as a shield. His sentences are often laced with apologies or framed by optimism, even when he's crumbling inside. But there's an undercurrent of urgency in his voice, too. A desperate need to be understood, to matter, to make peace before time runs out. His dialogue is filled with a subtle repetition of themes: honesty, connection, the possibility of goodness in others. These themes are not only part of what he teaches to his students, but also part of what he's trying to teach himself. And when Charlie finally allows himself to break through that carefully composed exterior, the rawness of his words hits with incredible force because we've heard him try so hard to stay calm for so long. One of the key recurring lines, "I just want to know that I've done one thing right in my life," is devastating in its simplicity. It doesn't rely on grand language or poetic flourish, yet it lands like a gut punch. This line crystallizes everything that Charlie feels, his internal ache for redemption, for some proof that he hasn't wasted his final years hiding from the world and his daughter. It's a line that sticks in the air, and in your memory, long after it's spoken. Ellie, by contrast, speaks in sharp, jagged bursts. Her dialogue is confrontational, sometimes cruel, always layered. She doesn't filter her thoughts. She throws them like darts, trying to provoke a reaction, trying to push Charlie away even as she's clearly testing to see if he'll stay. Her words can feel venomous, but the script smartly lets her complexity shine through. She doesn't speak this way because she's a villain. She speaks this way because she's hurt, neglected, and terrified of being vulnerable again. The writing gives her permission to be messy, to contradict herself, to be both a brat and a broken child searching for affirmation. Some of her lines are deeply uncomfortable to hear, vicious, even, but they're always believable. That believability is what gives them power. She's not polished. She's real. Then there's Liz, whose dialogue is the bridge between raw emotion and rational control. She's practical, often sarcastic, but her lines carry the weight of exhaustion, the kind of emotional fatigue that comes from caring too much for someone who's slowly slipping away. Her words are often brisk, laced with dark humor, but every once in a while, they crack open to reveal deep sadness. When she lashes out at Charlie, it's not out of cruelty, but out of love that's been pushed to the brink. Her dialogue walks a tightrope between protector and enabler, and the script allows her to shift between these roles fluidly, often within the same scene. She doesn't speak in cliches. She doesn't offer clean solutions. She speaks with the voice of someone caught in a tangle of duty, anger, love, and helplessness. Thomas, the young missionary, brings in another tonal layer. His speech feels rehearsed at first, like someone quoting from a pamphlet or repeating lines memorized from sermons. But the script allows him to evolve as the story unfolds. As he's challenged, his language becomes less formal, less composed. He begins to stumble, to admit uncertainty, to drop the performative certainty of his religious mission. His dialogue shifts from statements to questions. He stops speaking as a representative of a church, and begins to speak as a confused young man who's also running from something. That evolution is subtle but crucial, and it's achieved entirely through changes in tone and phrasing. Not with obvious exposition, but with the natural unraveling of belief under pressure. The beauty of the script is that it never tells us what to feel. It doesn't underline its themes or explain its metaphors. It trusts the audience to find the emotion inside the words. The conversations feel improvised even though they are tightly written, because the script allows space for breath, for pauses, for interruptions that mimic real human exchange. The silence between lines is just as powerful as the words themselves. When a character doesn't respond right away, that silence speaks volumes. When they talk over each other or change subjects abruptly, it feels like the tension in the room is too much to bear. And that's exactly the point. One of the most impressive achievements of the dialogue is how it manages to be emotionally dense without ever sounding like it's trying to impress. There's no overwritten monologue meant to show off the writer's talent. Instead, the lines carry their emotional weight like bruises, quiet, visible, and tender to the touch. Even the arguments feel different than the typical film shouting matches. They don't escalate for drama. They simmer. They erupt suddenly and awkwardly. They fizzle out into exhausted retreats. They feel lived in. There are also beautifully written moments of irony and contradiction in the dialogue. Charlie, who teaches his students to be honest in their writing, spends much of the film concealing the truth about himself. Ellie, who seems obsessed with exposing hypocrisy in others, hides her own vulnerabilities. Liz, who tells Charlie to take care of himself, enables the very habits that are killing him. The script doesn't point these contradictions out. It lets the audience recognize them through what the characters say and don't say. And woven through all of this is the essay. The student essay about Moby Dick that becomes a recurring symbol in the film. The way Charlie clings to that piece of writing, the way its words offer him comfort, says everything about the power of language to heal, to hold on, to mean something even in the face of death. The essay itself is not polished or profound. It's earnest, it's simple, it's emotionally honest. That's what makes it a cornerstone of the film's emotional journey. It's a piece of writing that, in its raw truthfulness, becomes more impactful than any poetic monologue ever could. The script of The Whale doesn't just give its characters lines, it gives them voices. Voices full of pain, hope, regret, and longing. Voices that stumble and reach. Voices that fight and forgive. It's dialogue that never tries to impress but constantly manages to move. Every word spoken feels like it matters. Every conversation pushes deeper. And by the end of the film, it's not just the story that stays with you. It's the sound of the characters trying to speak their truths before the silence takes over. The genre execution of The Whale, 2022, is remarkable because it not only steps outside the traditional lines of a drama, it almost dismantles the genre's comfort zone from the inside out. Most films that fall under the label of drama typically carry certain expectations. There's usually a redemptive arc, a sense of emotional release, and a structure that slowly guides the audience toward a moment of resolution, closure, or catharsis. The Whale challenges those assumptions with an intensity that is both uncomfortable and deeply absorbing. It doesn't just walk away from the usual genre playbook. It burns it quietly and offers something much more intimate, much more raw, much more real. At its surface, it seems like a classic chamber drama. The story is almost entirely confined to one setting, the apartment. There's a small cast, limited physical action, and nearly everything is driven by dialogue. That setup sounds like something we've seen before in many stage-to-screen adaptations. But what makes The Whale exceptional is how it takes these familiar elements and uses them in a way that tightens the emotional grip on the audience rather than offering relief. In many dramas, the single-location approach can feel like a narrative constraint, something to be overcome with flashy dialogue or heavy musical support. Here, the single location becomes the emotional landscape of the story. It's not a restriction, it's the film's beating heart. The decision to keep the story locked within Charlie's apartment for the entire film is a bold rejection of traditional cinematic movement. Most films would find ways to break out, maybe with flashbacks, cutaway scenes, dream sequences, even brief exterior shots to offer variety or to show time passing. The Whale refuses all of that. It locks us in with Charlie, forces us to sit with him, to stay in the claustrophobic rhythm of his life, to feel every slow, deliberate step he takes across the apartment, every painful breath, every awkward silence that stretches just a little too long. The film's refusal to escape the apartment is the perfect genre subversion because it ties the audience to Charlie's experience in the most direct, physical way. In most dramas, when a parent and child reconnect after years of separation, the genre often nudges them toward a familiar arc, a long journey of forgiveness, moments of nostalgia, awkward but heartwarming bonding, and ultimately a soft reconciliation. But The Whale brutally pushes back against this formula. Ellie is not a sweet, misunderstood daughter waiting to find common ground with her estranged father. She's angry, sharp, hostile, and often deliberately cruel. Charlie doesn't fight to make her love him again. He clings to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she will allow herself to be honest, to feel something real. Their relationship doesn't neatly heal. There's no grand moment of mutual understanding. The film dares to suggest that sometimes love is about showing up and giving everything, even when the other person won't give anything back. And that's a radical choice in a genre that often chases emotional payoff. The film also plays with the idea of time in a way that quietly undercuts the genre's usual pacing. In many dramas, illness is used as a ticking clock, a device to create urgency. The character must resolve relationships, complete unfinished tasks, find peace before the end arrives. The Whale has that ticking clock built in. Charlie's health is clearly failing, and time is running out, but the story doesn't rush to tie up loose ends. There's no frantic race against time, no montage of reconciliations, no last-minute miracles. The slow pacing becomes part of the emotional fabric, not an obstacle to overcome. The film lingers. It lets the weight settle. It trusts the audience to sit in the discomfort and resist the urge to look away. There's also something deeply interesting about how the film handles the religious elements. In many dramas, the appearance of a missionary character like Thomas would signal the beginning of a spiritual arc. The protagonist would either reject faith entirely or have some kind of moral awakening by the end. But The Whale does something much more complicated. It gives Thomas space to preach, to plead, to explain his beliefs, but the film doesn't position him as the savior, nor does it fully dismiss him. It leaves his presence as part of the chaotic swirl of perspectives in Charlie's life. Charlie doesn't embrace religion, but he doesn't harshly condemn it either. The film simply lets Thomas's mission sit in the room, unresolved, much like every other theme the story quietly carries. The subversion of the save the protagonist trope is another powerful way the film bends the genre. In many stories where a character is physically deteriorating, there's often a supporting character who fights relentlessly to keep them alive, to pull them back from the brink. Liz tries. She fights hard. But the film makes it painfully clear that her fight is not a fight she can win. Charlie is not a man who needs to be physically saved. He is a man who is searching desperately for meaning, for connection, for something truthful in the final stretch of his life. Liz's attempts to save him are heartbreaking precisely because they fail. That failure is not a plot twist. It's the core of the story's emotional honesty. The genre expectations around redemption are also challenged. So many dramas are built around the idea that a flawed protagonist must find redemption in their final moments, that their wrongs must be made right, that their guilt must be absolved before they can find peace. The Whale doesn't hand Charlie a clean redemption. He carries the weight of his choices, his mistakes, his guilt, and the film allows those things to remain unresolved. His quest isn't to be forgiven by everyone. His quest is to find a moment of truth, to believe that something he loved and lost still has value. His redemption is internal, quiet, incomplete, and far more powerful because of it. The handling of Charlie's body, his weight, and his physical limitations is another bold choice that tears away from traditional genre framing. Many films that center on characters with visible physical struggles can veer into exploitation or cheap sympathy. The Whale walks a careful, brutal line. It does not hide Charlie's body, nor does it turn it into a spectacle. The film presents his physical condition with a stark honesty, but it never reduces him to it. His body is a part of his life, a part of his pain, but it does not fully define him. The genre typically asks the audience to feel either inspired by or sorry for characters in Charlie's position. This film asks the audience to see him simply as a man, with all his flaws, kindness, regrets, and quiet hopes. In its emotional beats, the film refuses the standard genre rhythm. It doesn't build to swelling music, neatly timed tears, or cinematic declarations of love and forgiveness. It builds through pauses, through broken sentences, through people trying to say things that are almost impossible to say. The emotional climax isn't a monologue or a grand gesture. It's a moment of pure honesty, stripped bare of all the noise. Even the final moments of the film defy genre expectations. There's no last-minute confession that mends everything. There's no courtroom verdict, no race to the airport, no heroic reconciliation. The social and cultural commentary in The Whale, 2022, is not loud or obvious. It doesn't plant big signs in the narrative that scream, "This is the issue," or "This is the message." Instead, it quietly pulls you into spaces where real people live with these issues every day, making you confront them up close, without filters, without the protective distance that most films offer. The film dives into conversations about fat phobia, grief, faith, family breakdown, mental health, online alienation, and societal expectations. But what makes it so fascinating is how naturally these layers are embedded into the fabric of the story, never feeling like an afterthought, never feeling like the film is checking off social topics just to appear relevant. One of the most striking pieces of commentary is the way The Whale forces us to reckon with how society sees and treats obese people. In film and media, obesity is so often reduced to a visual joke, a symbol of failure, or a tragic health story. There's a cultural obsession with weight as a measure of moral worth, discipline, and success. What The Whale does is strip away all of that narrative packaging and present Charlie as a human being first. It's not just that Charlie is a man who is obese. It's that the film forces the audience to stay with him, to see him, to hear him, to watch him struggle with his body, his emotions, his guilt, and his relentless hope for connection. The film doesn't allow the viewer to look away, and that is a direct commentary on the way society often chooses to either ignore or ridicule people like Charlie rather than engage with them as complex, valuable individuals. The scenes where Charlie interacts with food carry a deeper cultural weight. Society tends to treat food addiction as a shameful lack of control, but the film reveals how eating, for Charlie, is tangled with grief, self-punishment, comfort, and survival. It's not about weakness. It's about pain, about filling a void that nothing else can touch. And this is where the film challenges cultural narratives around health. There's this idea in modern society that health is a simple matter of personal responsibility, that everyone should be striving toward the same aesthetic or physical ideal. The Whale obliterates that shallow idea by showing the tangled emotional wreckage that can drive self-destructive behavior. It's not offering a "just exercise and eat right" solution because it knows Charlie's battle isn't with calories. It's with himself, with his past, with his crushing loneliness. The cultural pressure to fix people like Charlie, to save them, to correct their bodies, is quietly but fiercely rejected by the film's refusal to treat him as a problem to be solved. The film also threads in a powerful critique of the performative way society deals with grief and guilt. Charlie is a man drowning in unresolved grief over the death of his partner, Alan. His grief is not the kind that moves through the expected stages and reaches neat acceptance. It's grief that festers, that consumes, that rewires his life. Society often likes stories where grief is a process with a clear finish line. But the whale insists that some grief never fades, never softens, never loosens its grip. Charlie's grief is uncomfortable because it never behaves the way society says it should. There's a quiet cultural indictment in the way people around him try to push him toward getting better, without really understanding the weight he's carrying. The religious layer in the film is handled with a quiet sophistication. Thomas, the young missionary, arrives as a kind of representative of traditional moral frameworks. He wants to save Charlie, but not because he fully understands him. It's because he feels it's his duty. The film never paints Thomas as a villain, but it uses him to question the role of religion in dealing with pain. His faith is structured, neat, full of packaged answers about sin, salvation, and forgiveness. But the messy, complicated lives he steps into are not so easily fixed by scripture. The film's refusal to offer a neat religious resolution feels like a commentary on how modern culture sometimes relies too heavily on ready-made spiritual answers to handle complex human suffering. It gently but firmly challenges the idea that faith alone can untangle the emotional wreckage of people like Charlie. Even more quietly, the film touches on the way capitalism and the modern work structure enable disconnection. Charlie teaches writing classes online, his camera always off, his face hidden from his students. His professional identity is fragmented. His students know his voice but not his reality. This isn't just a character quirk. It's a subtle jab at the way modern life encourages people to create digital versions of themselves that are disconnected from who they really are. In a world where remote work, online classrooms, and social media are becoming the primary ways people interact, the whale pushes us to ask whether those interactions are real, whether they are honest, whether they allow people like Charlie to actually exist as whole human beings, or whether they make it even easier for society to ignore those who don't fit the accepted mold. Charlie's desperate need for his students to write something honest cuts through all of this. His instruction is not just academic, it's a cultural cry. In a society obsessed with polished presentations, curated Instagram lives, and clickbait communication, Charlie begs his students to be honest. Just honest. It's his final plea against a culture that increasingly rewards surface-level interaction while punishing or ignoring brutal emotional truth. The film also tears apart the myth of the perfect family. Western culture, especially, clings to the idea that family is sacred, that blood ties should override all else, that broken families must be healed. But the whale isn't interested in neatly piecing its family back together. Charlie, Ellie, Mary, Liz, they are all broken in ways that love alone can't fix. The film respects the reality that love can exist alongside anger, disappointment, distance, and pain. Ellie's refusal to easily forgive Charlie is especially powerful because it fights against the cultural expectation that children must always come around in the end. Ellie is allowed to be furious. She's allowed to stay furious. The film gives her that emotional agency without punishing her for it. There's also a subtle but pointed commentary on how people decide what kind of suffering is worthy of compassion. Liz, who loves Charlie like family, veers between compassion and frustration. Society does the same. There's an unspoken cultural rule that some people deserve sympathy, while others bring it on themselves, and deserve only judgment. Charlie exists in that uncomfortable gray space where people, both in the film and in the real world, struggle to decide whether to pity him, judge him, or turn away from him entirely. The film forces the audience to sit in that discomfort, to look at him fully, and to feel the weight of their own biases. The film also dares to question the idea that helping people is always a noble act. Liz wants to help Charlie, but her help is complicated, sometimes enabling, sometimes motivated by her own unresolved grief. Thomas wants to help Charlie, but his help is more about easing his own guilt and performing his faith. Even Charlie's help to Ellie, trying to build her self-worth, trying to tell her she's amazing, is driven by his desperate need to leave something good behind. The social and cultural commentary in The Whale, 2022, is not loud or obvious. It doesn't plant big signs in the narrative that scream, "This is the issue," or "This is the message." Instead, It quietly pulls you into spaces where real people live with these issues every day, making you confront them up close, without filters, without the protective distance that most films offer. The film dives into conversations about fat phobia, grief, faith, family breakdown, mental health, online alienation, and societal expectations. But what makes it so fascinating is how naturally these layers are embedded into the fabric of the story, never feeling like an afterthought, never feeling like the film is checking off social topics just to appear relevant. One of the most striking pieces of commentary is the way The Whale forces us to reckon with how society sees and treats obese people. In film and media, obesity is so often reduced to a visual joke, a symbol of failure, or a tragic health story. There's a cultural obsession with weight as a measure of moral worth, discipline, and success. What The Whale does is strip away all of that narrative packaging and present Charlie as a human being first. It's not just that Charlie is a man who is obese. It's that the film forces the audience to stay with him, to see him, to hear him, to watch him struggle with his body, his emotions, his guilt, and his relentless hope for connection. The film doesn't allow the viewer to look away. And that is a direct commentary on the way society often chooses to either ignore or ridicule people like Charlie rather than engage with them as complex, valuable individuals. The scenes where Charlie interacts with food carry a deeper cultural weight. Society tends to treat food addiction as a shameful lack of control, but the film reveals how eating, for Charlie, is tangled with grief, self-punishment, comfort, and survival. It's not about weakness. It's about pain. About filling a void that nothing else can touch. And this is where the film challenges cultural narratives around health. There's this idea in modern society that health is a simple matter of personal responsibility, that everyone should be striving toward the same aesthetic or physical ideal. The Whale obliterates that shallow idea by showing the tangled emotional wreckage that can drive self-destructive behavior. It's not offering a just exercise and eat right solution because it knows Charlie's battle isn't with calories. It's with himself, with his past, with his crushing loneliness. The cultural pressure to fix people like Charlie, to save them, to correct their bodies, is quietly but fiercely rejected by the film's refusal to treat him as a problem to be solved. The film also threads in a powerful critique of the performative way society deals with grief and guilt. Charlie is a man drowning in unresolved grief over the death of his partner, Alan. His grief is not the kind that moves through the expected stages and reaches neat acceptance. It's grief that festers, that consumes, that rewires his life. Society often likes stories where grief is a process with a clear finish line. But The Whale insists that some grief never fades, never softens, never loosens its grip. Charlie's grief is uncomfortable because it never behaves the way society says it should. There's a quiet cultural indictment in the way people around him try to push him toward getting better, without really understanding the weight he's carrying. The religious layer in the film is handled with a quiet sophistication. Thomas, the young missionary, arrives as a kind of representative of traditional moral frameworks. He wants to save Charlie, but not because he fully understands him, it's because he feels it's his duty. The film never paints Thomas as a villain, but it uses him to question the role of religion in dealing with pain. His faith is structured, neat, full of packaged answers about sin, salvation, and forgiveness. But the messy, complicated lives he steps into are not so easily fixed by scripture. The film's refusal to offer a neat religious resolution feels like a commentary on how modern culture sometimes relies too heavily on ready-made spiritual answers to handle complex human suffering. It gently but firmly challenges the idea that faith alone can untangle the emotional wreckage of people like Charlie. Even more quietly, the film touches on the way capitalism and the modern work structure enable disconnection. Charlie teaches writing classes online, his camera always off, his face hidden from his students. His professional identity is fragmented. His students know his voice but not his reality. This isn't just a character quirk. It's a subtle jab at the way modern life encourages people to create digital versions of themselves that are disconnected from who they really are. In a world where remote work, online classrooms, and social media are becoming the primary ways people interact, The Whale pushes us to ask whether those interactions are real, whether they are honest, whether they allow people like Charlie to actually exist as whole human beings, or whether they make it even easier for society to ignore those who don't fit the accepted mold. Charlie's desperate need for his students to write something honest cuts through all of this. His instruction is not just academic, it's a cultural cry. In a society obsessed with polished presentations, curated Instagram lives, and clickbait communication, Charlie begs his students to be honest. Just honest. It's his final plea against a culture that increasingly rewards surface-level interaction while punishing or ignoring brutal emotional truth. The film also tears apart the myth of the perfect family. Western culture, especially, clings to the idea that family is sacred, that blood ties should override all else, that broken families must be healed. But the whale isn't interested in neatly piecing its family back together. Charlie, Ellie, Mary, Liz, they are all broken in ways that love alone can't fix. The film respects the reality that love can exist alongside anger, disappointment, distance, and pain. Ellie's refusal to easily forgive Charlie is especially powerful, because it fights against the cultural expectation that children must always come around in the end. Ellie is allowed to be furious. She's allowed to stay furious. The film gives her that emotional agency without punishing her for it. There's also a subtle but pointed commentary on how people decide what kind of suffering is worthy of compassion. Liz, who loves Charlie like family, veers between compassion and frustration. Society does the same. There's an unspoken cultural rule that some people deserve sympathy, while others bring it on themselves, and deserve only judgment. Charlie exists in that uncomfortable gray space where people, both in the film and in the real world, struggle to decide whether to pity him, judge him, or turn away from him entirely. The film forces the audience to sit in that discomfort, to look at him fully, and to feel the weight of their own biases. The film also dares to question the idea that helping people is always a noble act. Liz wants to help Charlie, but her help is complicated, sometimes enabling, sometimes motivated by her own unresolved grief. The Way the Whale, 2022, engages its audience is unlike the emotional grip of typical films. It doesn't come in the form of thrilling climaxes, surprise twists, or sudden jolts of laughter and tears that sweep the viewer up in a roller coaster ride. Instead, it's a quiet, steady pull that slowly wraps around the audience like an emotional weight they can't shrug off. It's the kind of engagement that doesn't just capture attention but demands that the audience wrestle with their own feelings, their own biases, their own emotional limits while watching it. The film builds a space where viewers are not just passive observers, but are forced to become emotionally present, almost as if they've stepped into that cramped apartment with Charlie, feeling the tension of every word, every pause, every small, devastating action. There are moments in the film that hit the audience with a deep, almost physical impact, moments that don't announce themselves with dramatic music or flashy editing, but instead creep up on you because they are so profoundly human. Like the brutal honesty of Ellie's words when she tears through her father's self-perceptions, or the suffocating stillness when Charlie binge eats in silence, pushing the audience to confront something society is rarely willing to witness so directly. These scenes elicit reactions that are not always comfortable. The audience isn't led to cry on cue or laugh to break the tension. Instead, they're pulled into a confrontation with their own emotional rawness, often unsure of what they're supposed to feel but fully aware that they're feeling something powerful. One of the most effective ways the film captures audience engagement is through the relentless closeness of the camera to Charlie's life. The cinematography and direction create a claustrophobic experience that traps the viewer in the apartment with him, where there is no escape from his struggles. This technique isn't just about storytelling, it's a way to make sure the audience can't retreat to the safety of emotional distance. They are forced to watch his body, his breath, his pain, his smallest movements. And this enforced closeness keeps viewers emotionally tethered, unable to look away even when they might want to. The film's refusal to offer traditional moments of relief is part of what makes it so deeply engaging. Many films use humor or moments of levity to release emotional tension, but The Whale rarely gives its audience that luxury. Instead, it keeps pressing, keeps deepening the emotional stakes, keeps asking difficult questions without sliding into sentimentality or manipulation. This creates an intensity that can leave audiences emotionally exhausted by the end, but also profoundly moved. It's not just sadness, it's a kind of emotional endurance test that asks viewers to sit with grief, with guilt, with regret, and to see these emotions through to their quiet, painful conclusion. What's especially interesting is how the film sparks different emotional responses in different viewers. Some are overwhelmed with empathy for Charlie. Some feel frustration with his self-destructive choices. Others are pulled toward Ellie's rage and pain. And some feel the weight of Liz's helplessness more than anything else. The film refuses to tell the audience who is right, who is good, or who deserves their sympathy. It gives each viewer space to form their own emotional alignment, which makes post-film discussions deeply personal and often very intense. Friends and family members who watch together might walk away having connected to completely different parts of the story. Some may find themselves haunted by the relationship between Charlie and his daughter, while others may be consumed by the exploration of grief, faith, or self-worth. The film's structure also pushes for repeat engagement. It's not a mystery that needs to be rewatched to understand the plot. It's the kind of film people revisit to experience the layers they didn't fully absorb the first time. On second and third viewings, audiences pick up on the subtleties of performances, the micro-expressions, the fragile beats between lines of dialogue, the careful pacing that at first might have seemed slow, but is actually calibrated to allow emotional truths to rise to the surface. The film invites reflection not just during the experience but long after, in quiet moments when viewers find themselves remembering a specific line, a glance, or a scene that unexpectedly resurfaces in their thoughts. The emotional engagement also extends to the film's exploration of the human desire for redemption. Charlie's unwavering hope that Ellie is a good person touches a nerve in almost every viewer, because whether consciously or not, people are drawn to the idea of redemption, for themselves, for their loved ones, for people they've lost. Charlie's belief is so pure and so desperate that audiences are split between wanting to believe with him and fearing that he's wrong. That inner tug-of-war creates an emotional tension that lasts well beyond the film's runtime. There are moments that don't just ask for emotional reactions, they demand them. When Charlie's breathing becomes labored, when he collapses, when he eats compulsively in a storm of self-loathing, when he quietly begs for honesty from his students, when he reads Ellie's essay, and we hear the crack in his voice. All these moments are loaded with emotional electricity. Audiences aren't merely watching a character go through struggles. They are being asked to feel those struggles in real time, to experience the unbearable weight of isolation, to sit in the spaces where words fail, where silence says everything. The film also cleverly keeps the audience emotionally engaged by making them participants in Charlie's final journey. It never spells out what the right emotional response should be. It never wraps anything up in a way that lets the audience off the hook. It's messy, it's unresolved, and that's exactly why people can't stop thinking about it. Viewers walk away grappling with their own feelings, sometimes even unsure how to process what they just experienced. It's the kind of film that lingers, that sticks to the ribs, that makes people lie awake at night replaying scenes, asking themselves what they would have done, whether they would have forgiven, whether they would have fought harder, whether they would have written something honest when asked. The Whale doesn't just want to move you. It wants to trap you in its emotional world until you're forced to confront your own vulnerabilities. It sparks deep reflection, not because it shouts its themes, but because it carefully builds its emotional architecture in a way that seeps into your bones. It becomes a conversation starter, not because it's provocative but because it's so achingly human that people feel compelled to talk about it, to unpack it, to understand it, to sit with it again. It's a film that reaches in, holds tight, and doesn't easily let go. When you really dive deep into comparisons between The Whale, 2022, and other films in similar genres or even within Darren Aronofsky's own catalog, the uniqueness of this film becomes even more striking. Aronofsky has built his career around films that expose the vulnerability, obsession, and self-destruction buried in human nature. Whether it's the relentless pursuit of physical perfection in Black Swan, the soul-crushing descent into addiction in Requiem for a Dream, or the brutal physical and emotional toll of Fading Glory in The Wrestler, Aronofsky always brings his characters to the edge. But in The Whale, he brings us to the edge and then simply sits there. He doesn't push the character into a spiraling montage or chaotic collapse. He strips away almost all movement, all visual flair, and forces us to just sit in the slow, crushing weight of Charlie's life. That's where The Whale feels like Aronofsky's most patient and controlled film. A raw, deliberately restrained peace that trusts the audience to endure silence and stillness without distraction. When you think about films that explore the complex relationship between a parent and a child, The Whale feels like a complete inversion of the usual formula. So many father-child stories in cinema follow an arc where the estranged parent slowly redeems themselves, reconnects, and earns forgiveness through action or sacrifice. Films like The Road, Finding Nemo, or Kramer vs. Kramer showcase the father figure fighting against external forces to prove their love. They move mountains. They go on literal or emotional journeys. But The Whale deliberately rejects the journey structure. Charlie isn't traveling across great distances to find his daughter. He can't. The entire emotional battlefield is reduced to a living room, a couch, and the few feet he can manage to cross on his walker. The struggle is internal. It's not about physical obstacles. It's about time running out, about whether his words can reach Ellie before his body gives out. That inversion makes The Whale a quietly radical take on the reconciliation story. There are no grand gestures, no chase scenes, no courtroom battles. Just two broken people sharing jagged, painful words in a tiny room. Compared to other stage-to-screen adaptations like Doubt, August, Osage County, or Fences, The Whale stays more loyal to the confines of its theatrical roots than most. Those films, though intimate, still create breathing room by occasionally stepping outside, by shifting locations, by expanding the physical world around the characters. The Whale remains almost suffocatingly trapped in one space, and it's a deliberate creative choice that enhances the story's emotional claustrophobia. There is no relief from the emotional weight, no visual escape. Where other adaptations sometimes lean into cinema to stretch beyond their stage boundaries, The Whale uses its single setting to pull the audience deeper into Charlie's isolation, making them live with him, feel his confinement, and slowly realize that the shrinking of his world is not just a narrative device, it's the perfect visual representation of his emotional state. When placed alongside films that focus on characters battling addiction, like Leaving Las Vegas or Beautiful Boy, The Whale chooses a more introspective route. It doesn't show the addiction spiraling in chaotic or cinematic ways. There's no nightclub binge, no fast-cutting montage of destructive behavior. The addiction in The Whale is agonizingly quiet. The way Charlie uses food is shown in raw, uncomfortable detail, but not in a way that sensationalizes it. Aronofsky forces the audience to sit with the silence as Charlie eats, not to shock or disgust, but to make viewers confront the pain and loneliness that drive those moments. Unlike films that frame addiction as something explosive and externally damaging, The Whale pushes viewers to face what happens when addiction turns completely inward, when the most destructive choices aren't made in public but alone, behind a closed door, without anyone there to stop it. It's also interesting to compare The Whale to films that center around protagonists in large bodies. Cinema rarely offers a narrative where a larger body is not a source of comedy or a journey toward weight loss. Movies like Heavyweights, Shallow Hal, and even more serious films like To the Bone tend to either reduce body size to a visual joke or set the story on a path where weight must be conquered to reach happiness. The Whale refuses to participate in that structure. Charlie's size is part of who he is, but it's not his only defining characteristic, and it's not presented as something to be fixed. His body isn't a problem to be solved. It's part of the world he lives in, part of the pain he carries, part of his story, but not the story's destination. There's no triumphant weight loss montage waiting at the end, no external transformation, no easy redemption through physical change. The film unapologetically focuses on Charlie's emotional journey, which is a stark departure from the way most mainstream films treat fat bodies on screen. When thinking about Brendan Fraser's performance and comparing it to similar career-reviving performances, it's impossible not to draw a parallel to Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler or Matthew McConaughey in Dallas Buyers Club. These are all performances where actors who had once been sidelined by Hollywood returned in roles that demanded total emotional and physical vulnerability. But Fraser's portrayal of Charlie is even more restrained than those performances. Where Rourke's Randy and McConaughey's Ron engage in physically grueling journeys with moments of explosive emotion, Fraser's performance is quiet, measured, and built on breath, eye contact, and the weight of unsaid things. It's not about shocking the audience with transformation. It's about holding them completely with stillness. Fraser brings the same kind of raw openness, but he does it in a space where almost nothing moves, and yet the emotional gravity feels immense. That's what makes his performance so distinct when compared to other iconic comebacks. It's an emotional avalanche that happens in slow motion. Even when comparing The Whale to other films about terminal illness like My Left Foot, The Sea Inside, or The Theory of Everything, the story pushes against the expected narrative arc. Those films often focus on perseverance, legacy, and finding meaning through struggle. The Whale centers instead on regret, desperation, and the hope for one single honest connection before time runs out. Charlie isn't trying to prove something to the world. He isn't fighting for survival in the traditional sense. His battle is more existential, more personal. His focus is on Ellie, on the belief that if he can reach her, if he can convince her that she's good, that's enough. There's no grander mission. No awards to be won. No larger-than-life speeches. It's an emotional pursuit that is so focused, so painfully specific, that it stands in contrast to the broader inspirational tones of similar films. When viewed within Aronofsky's career, The Whale is like the quiet, bruised heart that has been beating underneath all his louder films. His previous stories exploded with stylized visuals, hallucinatory sequences, and spiraling characters trapped in visual and psychological mazes. But when you really start peeling back the layers of The Whale, 2022, the depth of its symbolism and metaphors becomes even more intricate and powerful. The film is not just telling the story of a man trying to reconnect with his daughter. It's a story soaked in carefully constructed images, recurring motifs, and thematic anchors that create an emotional and intellectual landscape far larger than the walls of Charlie's apartment. Let's begin with the metaphor of the whale itself, which is a masterstroke in layered symbolism. At the most basic level, the title draws an immediate visual connection to Charlie's body, a detail that could easily be misinterpreted as the film's central focus. But the film constantly pushes the viewer to look deeper. The whale is not Charlie. It is the vast, unreachable, emotionally overwhelming force that Charlie is obsessed with confronting. It is his guilt. It is his lost chance at family. It is his belief in Ellie's goodness. It is his desperate, all-consuming pursuit of emotional truth before death. The link to Moby Dick is not surface decoration. It is a living, breathing metaphor that pulses throughout the film. Captain Ahab's relentless chase of the white whale was not really about the whale. It was about his obsession, his inability to let go of what destroyed him. Charlie's pursuit is emotionally parallel. He is chasing one final chance at connection, one final affirmation that his life was not meaningless, that his daughter is good. He chases it at the cost of everything else, including his body, his safety, and his time. The literary symbolism goes even further when we focus on Ellie's essay about Moby Dick, which becomes a crucial emotional anchor in the story. The essay is simple, brutally honest, and devoid of pretension, just like what Charlie asks from his students and from life itself. The essay's honesty is the very thing Charlie clings to. It is a symbol of clarity in a world where everything else is messy, broken, or drowning in pain. The essay is not a plot device. It's a metaphor for Charlie's belief that even in life's most crushing disappointments, there is beauty and truth worth seeing. Another subtle but persistent metaphor throughout the film is water. The sound of the sea, the crashing waves that appear at pivotal moments, the slow build toward the ocean's final roar. All of this serves as a symbolic representation of Charlie's emotional state. Water is both a threat and a release. It represents drowning, suffocation, the emotional weight Charlie carries, but it also represents freedom, cleansing, and the idea of returning to something pure and infinite. The ocean becomes a visual and auditory metaphor for Charlie's entire journey. It looms over the story like a distant, unreachable horizon that he's always swimming toward but can never quite reach. The final scene, where the sound of the sea swells and the light floods in, is not just a literal beat, it's the ultimate symbolic release. Whether that moment is real or imagined, whether Charlie is actually walking toward Ellie, or whether it's a final flash of peace before his death, the ocean's sound is his emotional liberation, his surfacing after years of drowning in guilt and self-loathing. The apartment itself is one of the most oppressive, meticulously constructed visual metaphors in the film. It's not just Charlie's home, it's his prison, his sanctuary, and his emotional coffin all at once. The The clutter, the narrow spaces, the shadows. It's all a physical representation of Charlie's internal world. The apartment traps him as tightly as his body does. It's the visual embodiment of his shrinking life, his isolation, his refusal to step outside and face the world. The apartment is a character in the story, with every hallway and doorway symbolizing emotional barriers and physical limitations. The more the story unfolds, the more the apartment feels like it's closing in. And yet, despite this claustrophobia, it is within these confined walls that Charlie attempts to expand his emotional reach. The paradox is brilliant. Physically, his world is collapsing, but emotionally, he is trying to expand it by reaching out to Ellie. Even the repeated theme of writing something honest is loaded with metaphorical weight. Charlie isn't just teaching his students to write. He is pleading for honesty in a world that thrives on performance, appearance, and denial. His insistence on honest writing is his battle cry against the artificiality of life's distractions. He knows he doesn't have time left for anything but raw truth. This becomes especially meaningful when we realize that Ellie's brutal honesty is what both repels and saves him. Ellie's cruelty is not sugar-coated, her anger is not softened, and yet it is precisely her unfiltered, unvarnished expression that Charlie clings to. In a world where people constantly lie to themselves and to others, honesty, no matter how sharp or painful, becomes the purest form of connection. Charlie's relationship with food is one of the most devastating metaphors in the film. Food is never presented as simple sustenance. It is the physical manifestation of his grief, his loneliness, his guilt. Every binge-eating sequence is more than just a portrayal of addiction. It is a metaphor for emotional drowning. Charlie consumes as a way to fill the void left by the loss of his partner and his fractured family. The more he eats, the more he suffocates, the more his body betrays him, and the more he retreats from the outside world. The compulsion to eat is his self-destructive prayer, his ritual of punishment, and his method of pushing people away even as he desperately wants them to come closer. It's a metaphor for the cycle of shame and comfort, a cycle he is trapped in and cannot escape. The character of Thomas, the young missionary, is also dripping with symbolic importance. He arrives as the walking embodiment of traditional salvation, carrying the message of religious redemption and spiritual rebirth. But Charlie is not interested in Thomas's version of salvation. The film sets up Thomas's mission as a contrast to Charlie's belief system. Thomas represents the external salvation often offered by religion, but Charlie is searching for something internal. A personal redemption built on honest connection, not on religious promises. This dynamic becomes a larger metaphor for the different ways people seek meaning. Some look to the heavens, others look to each other. Aronofsky quietly pits these worldviews against each other, never loudly dismissing either, but clearly leaning into the power of personal, human connection as Charlie's final, desperate pursuit. Even smaller objects in the film are loaded with metaphor. The essay about Moby Dick, the photographs Ellie leaves behind, the notebook she carries. All these items are not just props but symbols of memory, regret, and the fragile traces of connection that Charlie is desperate to hold on to. These physical objects become emotional artifacts, proof that his life and his love for his daughter still matter, even as his body breaks down. Ellie herself is a walking contradiction and a multi-layered symbol. She is not the savior, not the typical estranged child who comes back with softness and forgiveness. She is sharp, angry, distant, and yet profoundly magnetic. Ellie represents both the possibility of redemption and the brutal, unforgiving truth. She forces Charlie to face the consequences of his choices, and in doing so, she becomes the most honest person in his life. The Whale, 2022, doesn't exist within a cinematic franchise, nor does it attempt to recreate a specific historical period, but its historical context within film, theater, and Brendan Fraser's career is incredibly significant and worth diving into. To fully appreciate where The Whale sits, you have to understand it as a pivotal moment, not in a long-running series, but in the lineage of intimate, character-driven dramas that bridge the gap between stage and screen. It carries the DNA of films that came before it. Stories built around broken people, confined spaces, and emotional reckonings. But it carves out its own distinct space in that cinematic family tree. What makes its historical footprint fascinating is the way it arrives at a moment in film history where spectacle has largely overtaken subtlety, where franchises, superheroes, and visual extravaganzas dominate the box office. And yet here comes a quiet, deeply personal story that confidently demands attention without the need for explosions, twists, or extended universes. Historically, The Whale draws from a long tradition of stage-to-screen adaptations, but unlike many of its predecessors, it refuses to artificially open up the story. Films like A Streetcar Named Desire, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And Fences have all made the leap from theater to film, often by expanding locations, adding cinematic flourishes, or softening theatrical intensity to better fit the medium of film. But The Whale clings tightly to its stage roots, keeping the entire narrative inside Charlie's apartment, and allowing the limited space to fuel the emotional suffocation rather than escape it. This choice ties the film historically to a particular style of chamber drama that's not interested in appealing to the masses through movement or scale. Instead, it finds power in stillness, in raw dialogue, in character-driven moments that feel almost too intimate for the screen. In doing so, The Whale reconnects with a lineage of films that trust the strength of their performances and writing over the need for cinematic expansion. From a cultural and cinematic history perspective, The Whale arrives at a moment when body representation in film is undergoing intense scrutiny. Hollywood's history of portraying large bodies has often been steeped in stereotypes, cruel humor, or reductive narratives where weight loss is the character's inevitable arc. Films like Shallow Hal or Norbit leaned heavily into mockery, while others presented weight as a hurdle to be overcome for happiness or acceptance. The Whale stands in stark contrast to this tradition, presenting Charlie's body not as a joke or a problem to solve, but as a complex part of his emotional landscape. It challenges the way cinema has historically treated fat bodies, asking audiences to engage with the humanity of a character who is often invisible or misrepresented on screen. It doesn't exist in a franchise, but it enters the historical conversation as a film that disrupts the typical cinematic narrative about size, shame, and worthiness. Within Brendan Fraser's career timeline, The Whale holds immense historical weight. Fraser, once a beloved leading man in major blockbuster franchises like The Mummy, had largely disappeared from the Hollywood spotlight due to personal struggles, physical injuries, and professional setbacks. His return with The Whale isn't just a comeback, it's a historical moment in Hollywood's story about redemption and resilience. Fraser's performance resonates not only because of its emotional depth, but because audiences can feel the real-life echoes of his journey within Charlie's own fight for dignity, connection, and meaning. It's rare to see an actor's personal history blend so seamlessly with the character they're portraying, and that synchronicity places The Whale in the lineage of unforgettable comeback performances that change the trajectory of an actor's career, much like Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler or John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. In a broader historical sense, The Whale arrives during a time when the film industry is questioning what kinds of stories still hold weight in an era dominated by franchises, sequels, and cinematic universes. It represents a quiet rebellion against the formulaic storytelling that floods modern screens. While other films chase shared universes and franchise-building potential, The Whale stands as a singular, self-contained story with no prequel, no sequel, and no setup for future installments. It exists entirely on its own terms, asking viewers to sit, to watch, and to feel without the promise of more. Its historical importance is magnified by the fact that audiences and critics alike responded to it, proving that there is still a place for intimate, dialogue-heavy films that explore the interior lives of deeply flawed people. Though The Whale is not tied to a cinematic franchise, its placement in Aronofsky's personal filmography creates a thematic through line that almost acts like a spiritual franchise. Aronofsky's films, from Requiem for a Dream to The Wrestler to Black Swan, have always obsessed over broken characters, bodies under siege, and the extremes of human desperation. While each film stands alone, they collectively build a body of work that feels interconnected by tone, by emotional violence, and by the relentless pursuit of something unattainable. In that way, The Whale is less a sequel and more a spiritual sibling to these films, extending the ongoing exploration of the human condition that Aronofsky has carved out over decades. The film also connects to the historical tradition of stories about isolation and emotional imprisonment, sitting comfortably alongside films like The Elephant Man, My Left Foot, and The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Each of these films tackled physical limitation as a metaphor for emotional struggle, but The Whale modernizes this approach by presenting Charlie's journey without sentimentality, without smoothing over his sharp edges. It respects the complexity of his life, his mistakes, and his relentless, sometimes frustrating, belief in his daughter's goodness. So while The Whale is not part of a franchise, it finds its historical place as a film that breaks away from commercial trends, revives an actor's career in a way that feels culturally seismic, and contributes to the lineage of emotionally grueling, intimate dramas that trust their audience to stay present without distraction. It is a film that captures a moment in cinema history where the quiet, personal story somehow managed to make as much noise as the loudest blockbuster. When you look at The Whale 2022, through the lens of budget and box office, it becomes an interesting case study in how a film doesn't need a mountain of money to make a mountain of impact. The Whale was produced on a modest budget, estimated to be around $3 million, which in today's Hollywood landscape is a tiny drop compared to the colossal sums being poured into superhero spectacles, franchise giants, and CGI-driven blockbusters that often balloon to $150 million and beyond. But The Whale was never chasing that game. It wasn't trying to be the next global cinematic event with international explosions and billion-dollar aspirations. It was a small, personal film with a laser focus on storytelling, character work, and intimate emotional stakes. Every dollar of that budget was used carefully, almost surgically, to create an immersive, raw, and claustrophobic atmosphere that didn't need grand sets or flashy visuals to hold the audience's attention. When you watch The Whale, you can see exactly where the money went. Most of it was likely allocated toward Brendan Fraser's transformative prosthetics, the carefully detailed apartment set, and the kind of makeup, lighting, and practical effects that make Charlie's physical condition feel achingly real without slipping into artificiality. The film's single location design was not just a stylistic choice. It was a smart financial decision that maximized the emotional intensity without inflating production costs. There are no sprawling location shoots, no elaborate action sequences, no heavy visual effects that chew up the budget. The intimacy of the setting keeps costs low, but paradoxically, it makes the emotional stakes feel enormous. This is where The Whale plays its hand perfectly. It invests its budget into authenticity, not spectacle. Now, stepping into the world of box office numbers, The Whale was never positioned to be a blockbuster, but it found remarkable financial success relative to its size and ambitions. The film grossed over $54 million worldwide, which is a stunning return on a $3 million investment. This kind of profitability is the stuff small studios dream about. It's the textbook example of how a film can quietly win big if it strikes the right emotional chord with audiences and gets the right kind of critical buzz. Brendan Fraser's career resurgence became a major talking point in the media, creating a groundswell of audience curiosity and genuine excitement around the film. People didn't flock to The Whale because it was trending on every social platform, or because it was part of a multi-billion-dollar cinematic universe. They came because they wanted to witness a performance that had already started to generate powerful word of mouth. The marketing campaign was relatively understated, yet incredibly effective. It wasn't plastered on every billboard or splashed across fast food packaging like some of the blockbuster competitors. Instead, the marketing leaned heavily into film festivals, emotional trailers, and the comeback narrative surrounding Brendan Fraser. His standing ovations, his tearful festival appearances, and the viral clips of his heartfelt gratitude to fans became the engine that propelled this film into the public consciousness. The audience reception was overwhelmingly tied to Fraser's performance, but it didn't stop there. The film's reputation for being emotionally devastating, brutally honest, and unapologetically intimate created a niche appeal that spread quickly among viewers who wanted something more grounded and personal. Award season also played a critical role in boosting the film's box office life. Films like The Whale often get a second wind at the box office when nominations and wins start piling up. Brendan Fraser's Oscar buzz significantly extended the film's visibility and audience reach. The prestige factor helped pull in viewers who may not have initially been interested in a character-driven drama, but wanted to see what all the awards talk was about. It's a fascinating example of how critical acclaim and audience curiosity can transform a small film into a financial winner without the need for a blockbuster blueprint. Compared to other films in its budget range, The Whale overperformed in every sense. Small dramas often struggle to break through the noise in today's market, but The Whale rode the perfect wave of timing, performance, and emotional resonance. It wasn't a film that relied on marketing saturation, it relied on connection. It relied on the power of Fraser's return, the weight of the story, and the sincerity that audiences were craving amid a sea of overproduced, high-budget spectacles. The return on investment wasn't just monetary, it was cultural. The film made its mark, it sparked conversation, it moved people, and it did all of that on a budget that would barely cover the catering bill on a Marvel film. In the grand theater of box office stories, The Whale is a reminder that you don't always need a superhero or a spaceship to bring people into a cinema. Sometimes, all you need is an honest story, a tight space, a brilliant performance, and a little bit of trust that audiences still care about raw, human connection. The budget was small, the box office was a triumph, and the film's success became part of the larger narrative about what kinds of stories still have power in the modern movie landscape. Here's how you can watch The Whale, 2022, and get the most out of this emotionally powerful film. Clapperboard in theaters and premium video on demand (PVOD). It premiered in U.S. theaters on December 9, 2022 limited indie release, expanding wide on December 21. en.wikipedia.org. 1. The intimate, dialogue-driven nature of the story means it's most impactful on the big screen. Enclosed spaces, close-ups, and Fraser's performance shine best in a theater. By February 21, 2023 it moved to VOD, so soon after its theater run you could rent or buy it digitally. Television streaming subscription options. In the U.S., it's currently available on Max, formerly HBO Max, including via its Amazon channel, subscription around $9.99/month, justwatch.com. 2. It's also accessible through the Hulu Plus Max bundle, bringing in the film via the Max add-on, justwatch.com. 2. Laptop computer rent or buy digitally. If you'd rather own or rent it, options include Amazon Video, Apple TV, Google Play, Fandango at Home, and Microsoft Store. Typically for around $4.99 to rent in HD or 4K, and $19.99 to buy. Glow showing Europe, Africa international availability. Outside the US, streaming options vary. UK, Canada, and other countries often offer it through Amazon Prime Video or Apple TV. Netflix listings show region blocks. If it's not available, check local rent/purchase platforms or wait for regional rollout. Lightbulb best viewing experience. Theater ideal. Feel the confined space, larger-than-life performance, and raw emotional intimacy. 4K digital purchase choose UHD for clarity and atmosphere. Fraser's subtle expressions and the apartment's shadows register better. Streaming. Max/Hulu bundle watch in HD or 4K at home, ensuring closed captions and minimal distractions for maximum impact. For a film this intimate, the environment matters. Dim the lights, eliminate interruptions, and lean in, emotionally and physically. That's how The Whale resonates the most. 1. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/the_whale_percent sign 28202_sign #film%sign 29 $mark UTM_source=sign chat gpt.com The Whale, 2022 film. 2. https://www.justwatch.com/us/movie/the-whale-2022 UTM_source=sign chat gpt.com The Whale streaming. Where to watch movie online. Just watch.